You just go day by day right now, and we play Winnipeg and we play Colorado Saturday, Sunday. Like, the reality is we got to get 4 points. If we get 4 points, that changes your mindset a little bit. And if you don't get 4 points, so it's a day-by-day thing right now. We haven't put ourselves in a great spot, but right now it's up to the players to change that momentum. We haven't won 3 in a row. We have to win 3 in a row by the time the trade deadline comes, or you're going to just run out of runway. So it's an uphill battle. I don't want to lie and say no. We're right there. Once you win 4 in a row, or 5 in a row, or 6 in a row, everything changes. We haven't been able to do that yet, and so we're in a tough spot.
That was Doug Armstrong on TMA earlier today with Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Doug Armstrong understands the reality for the St. Louis Blues. This is not a playoff team, man. We've tried to, hey, this is what it would look like if they were to try to get back into things. Here's what teams have done that were in the Blues situation that did end up getting back into it. Man, it requires winning 6 in a row and then winning 6 out of 7, beating the 2019 Blues, and then suddenly you're basically filming a Disney movie suddenly.
We already did that.
That's not what this team is. They're not capable of that. They have not shown the ability to do that. This team hasn't even won 3 games in a row, much less 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row, which is the kind of thing that they'd have to have. But, Alex, now that we are finishing up with this Four Nations break, tomorrow night you have the U.S. versus Canada, and then starting over the weekend, you got the Blues back in action Saturday night at home against Winnipeg. It is time to start turning the page of, okay, so we get out of this break, 6, 7 games prior to the deadline. What's the Blues' plans? So, as of today, where do you stand on that, Alex?
Sell, baby, sell.
Okay.
That's where you're at. I mean, look at the next 7 games out of this break and their opponents, and tell me that there's still a opportunity to look at potentially either buying or trying to make a playoff run. I mean, you're talking Winnipeg, Colorado, L.A., Dallas. Seattle's in there, which is nice, but how have you fared against teams that are kind of right around your territory?
Not good.
Not great. So, yeah, I mean, I think where they're at right now shouldn't be a surprise to many people. Are they holding out hope that maybe they go on some type of crazy run? Absolutely. If you're a front office, you're going to look at this. You're not going to just diminish the return for your players with 26 games to go and be like, yeah, this team's not good, so we'll be selling come March 7th, but for right now, we'll just pretend like we're going to push. No, you're going to believe that you can go out there and pick up a couple of wins. But when you get closer to it, that's when teams really start calling. And what's going to be advantageous for this Blues team in the midst of this retool that they're still discussing is sending out pieces that don't fit into your timeline, and in return, bringing in assets. And it's not assets like it's been 3 years ago where you're bringing in draft picks and you're like, oh, we'll draft somebody in the 4th round this year. No, all of the assets you bring in this offseason or this trade deadline, in my opinion, are going to be flipped in the offseason to try and better your team as quick as possible.
I was about to say, that's the thing that I do think kind of gets lost in translation sometimes, because, yes, the Blues might trade players for draft picks. That may happen this year at the deadline. That does not mean those draft picks are going to be utilized by the Blues to select players at those positions. It could very easily be, hey, the Blues get a 2nd-round pick in return from one team, a 3rd-round pick in return from another, and then maybe they do end up getting a 1st-round pick from somebody for Brayden Schenn or something, right? Cool. All of that's great. I now have a 1st, 2nd, and a 3rd-round pick that are assets for me in the offseason.
Right.
I can use those and package them along with, I'm just throwing out names here, Zach Bolduc or Zach Dean, Jimmy Snuggerud even maybe. Like, who knows who the players are that are going to be bandied about depending on what's available on the other side of things. Brady Tkachuk is available. Well, yeah, I'm willing to talk about anything that's on my roster, basically. So that's what those prospects or draft capital, that's what they're for. It's used as an arsenal to now be able to make an offer for something that helps me now. Yeah. Not in 2025, this year, like this current season that we're playing, but going into next year.
And to put this into perspective, let's go back to this last draft when the Tampa Bay Lightning traded Mikhail Sergachev to the Utah Hockey Club for 1 prospect, 1 NHL defenseman, and a 2nd-round draft pick. Oh. Like, those are the pieces that you try and acquire. So if trade deadline comes and this Blues team has acquired, and by the way, they've got about $8 million in cap space, and if they ship guys out that also have money tied to them, they could be the middleman for a lot of teams to bring in multiple draft picks. But if you get to the draft and there's a guy that's not willing to sign a contract extension or a guy that's not working with the team, you offer up a second and a third round pick and a future first round pick or maybe one of your prospects. That's how you go acquire an NHL player. Sergachev, like I just mentioned for Utah, go back a few years ago when Alex DeBrincat was traded from the Ottawa Center or from Chicago to Ottawa. All of those deals get done at the draft. But they start at the deadline once you start acquiring those assets. So this isn't about selling off pieces and hoping to get multiple first-round picks. No, the pieces that you realistically are going to sell are probably going to bring in a fourth, a fifth, a sixth-round pick. It doesn't do much for you.
Unless you decide to trade more. There's speculation out there, and right now it's just speculation. Darren Dreger, one of the best insiders in the business, has talked about it. Hey, a lot of other teams across the league would love to get their hands on Brayden Schenn. They view him as a championship-caliber player. He could plug in as a second or third-line center on some of these contending teams, bring his 50 to 60 points that he provides, that gritty style of play, the leadership. He fits into a lot of these teams, and they would love to trade for him. But the Blues will see if he's available. Dreger will join us coming up in about 10 minutes to discuss his availability potentially. But Doug Armstrong, on with TMA earlier today, talked about, hey, that speculation is indeed out there. How do you handle that as the president of hockey operations?
Anywhere between 14 to 21 days. Rumors, people have their day jobs, want to speculate on where you're at. And quite honestly, we've unfortunately earned the right to be in the speculation business for, I would say, the better part of a decade. We were acquiring players because of where we were in the NHL. And when you're a non-playoff team, teams are looking to improve, and they look at non-playoff teams. They look at good players on non-playoff teams, and that's where the speculation starts. So it's an uncomfortable time for everybody. But it is what it is. It is what it is. We put ourselves in a bad spot this year, in where we have to just absorb the rumors that are out there.
I respect, Brayden Schenn talked about it yesterday with the media as well. I respect the Blues' willingness to just say, hey, listen, we can blame nobody but ourselves for this speculation being out there. Because it's true. If you were 5 games above 500, man, we're not talking about that. We're talking about who the Blues are going to go out there to trade for. That's what we were doing up until about 6 weeks ago, frankly. But the Blues played really poorly. They ended up losing a bunch of games. They haven't won 3 in a row. So, yeah, we're going to talk about Brayden Schenn and whether or not he's out there potentially being bandied about. Or Ryan Suter, or Justin Falk, or Nick Leddy, or 100 of the other players that could be out there available via the St. Louis Blues, because that's where they've put themselves. When you're out of the playoffs, not just by a couple of games, but by basically 10 points at this point, yeah, that's how this thing goes.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into this a little bit more in the 12 o'clock hour, but to me, this is a really pivotal trade deadline / offseason because they've put that time frame and that window of the retool. You've got these prospects that are coming through your system, but this kind of feels like the line drawn in the sand by front office that says we can't do this again. And that's why I do find this trade deadline very fascinating in terms of some of these longer contracts that could get traded away. You've missed the playoffs with this season, 3 straight years. This is the 3rd year of that retool that they've discussed. This can't just be a par for the course to where it's, hey, we missed the playoffs again, we'll run it back with the same roster. We said that last year where they said you can't run it back with the same defensive core. And what took place? One guy was out for long-term injury. They made the trade to go get, or they offer sheeted Philip Broberg. They signed Ryan Suter. And then middle of the season, they traded for Cam Fowler. They backed their words by saying we can't go into next season with the same defensive core because it was so bad multiple years. Now you're going to go into the same offseason where you've missed the playoffs, your offense is underperformed, and you've got a lot of guys that were supposed to be a part of the solution. That's why I do find this trade deadline very appealing in the sense of I don't know how many guys are going to be on this roster after the trade deadline, because I think Blues, at least Doug Armstrong's perspective, whether you believe it's rumors or you think it's really going to happen, I think there needs to be a little bit of sense of cleaning house because you can't run it back with the same group from this year to next year.
One of the things that I appreciate about Doug Armstrong is that he's open to stuff. He's willing to, this offseason, we talked about it, Alex, hey, this is the perfect scenario for a team, if ever there was one, to use offer sheets to their disposal because, hey, you're in the midst of a retool. Those draft picks probably don't have the same value that they once did for you. You've got all this cap space. You're not involved in July 1st. It's like, it doesn't matter if you tie up that money for you. And there's a bunch of other teams, because of the way that the flat cap had existed, now that's not going to exist anymore, as we know. This is the year to utilize this. A bunch of other GMs across the league would have been like, yeah, but we don't do that. That's not the way that we operate. With Army, he's like, all right, I'm targeting you, mother bleepers. It is you. You had Stan Bowman. He's out of there, so my buddy's gone. We got you. We got you over the barrel, and we're going to take two of your best young players that are former first-round picks. And he did it. Or he's going to go out there and target, hey, Anaheim, we really like Cam Fowler. No, he's not a perfect player, but we think he's pretty good. He's going to help us. He'll do anything that helps his team. At a deadline, when the Blues were kind of still in it, he traded Paul Stastny. It's like, nope, you're not actually in it. A week before the Blues were supposed to make their decisions, the Blues started going on a little bit of a run. And what did Army do? He said,
O'Reilly's
bleep
gone.
all of you. O'Reilly, get out of here. I'm not trusting any of this stuff. I've been fooled before. Yep. Army is aggressive, dude, and he listens on stuff, and he will see what's out there. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe in my heart of hearts. He is listening on Brayden Schenn. I bet you he's listening. This is not reporting, but speculation. I bet you he's listening on Benner. Because why not? That does not mean that you have to make the move. But what does it hurt you to find out how other teams value your players? One of the things that it does, and Army mentioned that at a recent press conference, hey, if teams are not willing to give you anything for your players, maybe you're overvaluing them. If you're looking at a guy like, I don't know, Jake Neighbors, for example. I love him. I don't think this is the case, but just to use him as an example. And other teams are like, yeah, we don't think that he's even worth like a third-round draft pick to trade for. That would make me wonder, like, okay, what are we missing, right? Or if you got Zach Bolduc and other teams like, yeah, we don't want him as a package for one of our good players. Okay, what are we missing there? Or if it's a Justin Falk and there's zero interest across the league in him. Okay, maybe we're overvaluing this guy a little bit.
Or how about a Brandon Saad that literally was shot from the offseason on, and they said, there's nothing out there. We're putting you through waivers.
That is what this time is for. It allows you to understand how other teams value your players, and it can, whether it's at the deadline or in the offseason, it can start that process.
Yep. And real quick, because we got to get to Darren Dreger on the other side, go back to what JR said yesterday. I truly believe they will be aggressive because Doug Armstrong wants to set this team up so that they're in a winning window when Steen takes over after next season. So this is kind of that, again, line in the sand that says we cannot be a team that misses the playoffs again next year.
So that's what it sounded like earlier today on TMA as Doug Armstrong joined the show. With Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you guys want to get involved, 314-399-9646 is the way to do so. You can check us out on YouTube as well, youtube.com/101ESPN STL. Let's hear from Darren Dreger coming up on the other side. He was one of the first to report that there has been conversations across the league about the availability of Blues captain Brayden Schenn. He said that the return needs to be mammoth in order for a trade to take place. Darren Dreger joins us to discuss that next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. A few days ago, Darren Dreger mentioned that Brayden Schenn's name is one that's out there. He added that the return would have to be, quote, mammoth, a great word choice there. And Darren Dreger joins us now via the Callier and Thompson hotline, one of the best insiders in the business for the NHL. He does so for TSN. You can also hear him on the Ray and Dregs podcast. Joins us now on 101 ESPN. Dregs, we always appreciate the time. Let's start with that. That's the big speculation, certainly, that's taking place here in St. Louis is what the future is going to hold for the captain. What can you tell us about what you've heard on Brayden Schenn's potential future?
Well, I mean, the truth is there hasn't been a whole lot of progress on that file. And that's not to say that more can't be discussed or won't be discussed. I think inevitably there will be ongoing discussions. But I don't think that Doug Armstrong or anyone associated with Brayden Schenn is in a position to say it's likely that the captain is going to be traded in time for the March 7th trade deadline. But, you know, he's a curious piece because of what St. Louis Blues fans are keenly aware of, what he brings, right? So when you look around the National Hockey League, you see all the teams that are in the market for a top center. Why wouldn't you be attracted to Brayden Schenn if he's willing to waive his no-trade clause? And he may not be. I know that he loves St. Louis, but I think what's happening here is Doug Armstrong is keenly aware of where the St. Louis Blues are right now. Is he convinced that this is a playoff-worthy team? Is he leaning towards having to renovate or retool in some fashion? So what all general managers do is they take stock. They take stock of the level of interest, and then you weigh that level of interest versus replacement and what that's going to mean to the St. Louis Blues, both in the short-term future but in the long-term future as well. The interest is high in Brayden Schenn. It 100% is. But, again, be it contractual or the pieces that Armstrong would command and demand to even consider a trade like that might be prohibitive. And if it doesn't happen by March 7th, then guess what, guys? We're talking about this in the off season as well. So that's just the reality of the life of a veteran NHL player who's got a terrific contract and has high value in terms of what he could bring to a contending team.
Darren, I think when you used the word mammoth on that report, that's what everybody in St. Louis was like, whoa, really? When you look at the views in a mammoth return, in your opinion, does that involve draft picks or does that involve NHL players?
Well, I think both, right? And I guess the definition comes in what level of NHL player are we talking about here? Again, if the Blues are interested in some form of renovation, chances are they're going to do that by going somewhat younger, right? So I would be looking at a young NHL roster player or a player that is just on the cusp of breaking into the National Hockey League as a better or a top prospect. That'd be one part of it. Maybe you get a secondary prospect, a player who, you know, is close. There's some level of uncertainty. He's playing in the American League. He's, you know, playing college hockey. Don't know. And then a draft pick could be applied to that as well. And what level of draft pick are we talking about here? You know, I look at the St. Louis Blues, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, the 2025 draft coming up, I think St. Louis has 3 picks, a first, a fifth, and a sixth.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, if I'm Doug Armstrong, and he's been at this a long, long time, I'm pushing for a first if I can get it, but I'm also keenly aware that a second would be nice. You know, it's a pretty good draft pool. It's not great from about 10, 12, 15 of the first round all the way through the second. So maybe you can squeeze out a second-round draft pick as part of that package. But, you know, again, that can be shifted, too, if all of a sudden a team that really feels they're a contender or they don't have any issues with the salary hit of $6.5 million because they've got players in LTI or any of that, maybe they're more willing to give out a better piece. A proven NHL player that's a little bit younger, just because, again, they're looking at Brayden Schenn as being what they might perceive to be a missing piece. But if it gets to that stage, guys, then obviously Brayden is going to have to sign off on that. And to my knowledge, there has been no conversation with him specifically to say, okay, well, we have had a number of conversations with clubs over this Four Nations break. and we feel confident that we're going to get to that place. I don't think it's anywhere near that.
Darren Dreger is our guest here on 101 ESPN, talking about the speculation that possibly Brayden Schenn could be at least available at the trade deadline. No word on if there's going to be any kind of a deal, but the conversations potentially are being had right now.
Yeah.
Dregs, when we're talking about this, Toronto is a team that obviously comes up for a million different reasons. The need that they have down the middle, the history that he has with Craig Berube, and the style of player, frankly, that he is, that they're lacking in their lineup.
Yep.
So I did want to ask you, because this is a name that comes up most of the time from our text line whenever we talk about it with Toronto. It feels like a hard fit because Matthew Nyes is the exact kind of player that you were describing. Young, great prospect, good pedigree, but he's a good player. He's somebody that's helping the Toronto Maple Leafs win right now, and they're trying to contend this year. So is that the type of player that you think would potentially be in return in these kinds of negotiations, or should Blues fans strive for something a little lower than that?
I would say lower than that. I can't imagine the Toronto Maple Leafs would entertain that, with all due respect to Brayden Schenn. I mean, Matthew Nyes is a big part of the future of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I heard or I saw somewhere, and I can't remember who said it, but how about a one from Marner for Schenn? Well, that's not happening, guys. Like, come on.
I'll accept it right now. Let's call it in, Dregs.
Deal, Dregs.
Yeah, I mean, come on. So me spitballing here, again, this is not information that's coming from the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the package that I could vision the Maple Leafs at least entertaining, and this might be a tough one from Toronto's standpoint, would be somebody like Fraser Minton. They've got a good developing prospect in Danforth in the American League of Defensemen, and again, maybe that draft pick, or maybe it's another piece, something off their roster to make the dollars make some sense as well. If Doug Armstrong is digging in, and they have progressive conversations between Armstrong and Treliving, but he needs Nyes to be part of that, I don't see it working. I don't, and then he's looking around the other interested parties, other teams that I'm sure have explored Armstrong's interest in having trade dialogue, but then getting into the nitty-gritty of what a deal like that looks like. So if it were me from Toronto's standpoint, maybe it's Minton or Easton Cowan. Maybe it's Danforth included, and then a draft pick, as we've discussed.
Dregs, as a follow-up on that, Toronto's one team that we've heard Vegas has been bandied about because it's a star player, and so that means Vegas, of course, has to be at least discussed in some way or another.
Yeah.
Are there other teams, based on your understanding, reporting, even speculation on your end, that you think make sense or have potentially checked in on Schenn's availability?
Well, again, any team that's looking for a center, the Vancouver Canucks traded JT Miller to the New York Rangers. Vancouver needs a center. Vancouver is going to acquire a center piece. They've got or had Elias Pettersson playing for Sweden in the Four Nations, and he was underwhelming, and that might even be flattering. They were hoping that it was going to be a reset for him. They need him to be a top player. And he wasn't. Not saying he can't be. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. But if he isn't very quickly out of the Four Nations break, then maybe that elevates the need and the want and the chase of the Vancouver Canucks for a better center than maybe they had been targeting. Calgary made their deal with the Philadelphia Flyers, but it sounds like they're still kind of kicking tires on the idea of a center. I know Ottawa has a whole lot of interest in Brayden Schenn, just the character of the player, right? Whether or not they have a fit for him, whether or not they've got the pieces that are required to make a deal like that, I don't know. That's up to Steve Staios and his hockey operations people to decide. So I mentioned a few teams here, guys, and that might be underselling the level of interest. But again, I want to qualify for Blues fans and your listeners. That's what happens. So, and let's not get caught up in a semantics game here. When I reported this, I did not suggest for a second that Doug Armstrong was shopping Brayden Schenn.
Sure.
And I don't believe that he's still shopping Brayden Schenn. He is listing the interest because of his appetite to do his job as general manager of the St. Louis Blues, and that's to contend for a Stanley Cup again as soon as is humanly possible. So that's not this year. And it's going to require a real big move, like moving the captain, so that they get there in the very near future again, well, of course, he has to consider that, and that's where he's at.
Darren, kind of following up with that, obviously we've targeted Brayden Schenn a lot in this conversation, but it feels like there's other names that teams could be calling about for the Blues. Yeah. Do you think they're going to be a very active team on the phone side of things with their roster?
Well, they could be, and I know that's not answering your question. All teams that are outside the cut line in the playoffs are automatically talking about teams about expiring contracts. So when you look at the pending unrestricted free agents in St. Louis, I mean, those pieces for sure would be in play, I would think. Guys, believe it or not, and it seems to be an annual affair, and anyone close enough to this player kind of chuckles when his name surfaces. There's always kind of a buzz around Colton Parayko. Right? What is he, in third year of an 8-year deal? Mm-hmm. He's a $6.5 million cap hit, exactly the same as Brayden. He's got the full no-trade clause, at least as it applies to this year. But when you're having conversations in St. Louis management about potentially trading your captain, undoubtedly you're getting calls on some of your other more attractive pieces, like the big hulking right-shot defenseman that Colton Parayko is. But I don't put any stock into it yet. But there have been whispers, lower-level whispers of his name being out there. So, if that becomes true as we creep closer to the trade deadline, and I'm curious, guys, just to back it up a little bit, to see how anxious general managers are going to be once the Four Nations finale is out of the way tomorrow night. Could we see some activity around the National Hockey League as early as Friday or on the weekend? And the answer to that is, yeah, we could. I don't see anything front burner, but we've talked about, the sense of appetite that's out there. And when you're looking at centers, Brayden Schenn, and you're looking at right shot defenseman, Colton Parayko, then that's where these trade rumors kind of start to percolate and get a little bit higher level. I don't anticipate that going into this weekend. But would I be surprised if we saw some action as early as Friday across the league? No, I wouldn't be surprised by that either.
Darren Dreger is our guest here on 101 ESPN for just another minute. We sincerely appreciate his time. Find all of his great work over at TSN. You can also listen to his podcast, Ray and Drege's podcast. You can find that on Twitter at Darren Dreger. Drege's final question that I've got for you. I wanted to ask you kind of bigger picture about the St. Louis Blues, because one of the things that we've been talking a lot about this year is, okay, Jordan Kyrou, good player. Robert Thomas, good player. Colton Parayko, good player. Good goalie with Benner. We're seeing that now in the Four Nations face-off. They lack that superstar, and they won in 2019, not necessarily with a true superstar, although Vladdy could in some way be considered that at that point in time. Is that something that, in your opinion, the Blues need to add still to this roster, whether it's via trade in the offseason or via free agency in the offseason? Is that what this team is missing, is that true superstar talent?
Well, I think they would like to add that for sure. What team wouldn't?
Sure.
But the tougher equation is, how do you do it? If you don't draft and develop that, and St. Louis has drafted well, I think, and they've got some good young players, as you've identified here. But I automatically, as you're asking that question, the team that I think about is the Detroit Red Wings, right? Now, there's a team that is trying to make a move, and we look at Dylan Larkin, and on a lot of teams, he's a number one center, but is he a star center? No, and Detroit is very similar. They don't have that player. So how do you acquire them? Well, you either blow up your roster and you throw everything you can by a trade, or you dive into the market. So, guys, what do we think the free agent market is going to look like this July? And it could be fascinating. I mean, there's really nothing going on around Mitch Marner and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that might be frustrating for Brad Treliving in Toronto. I'm sure that he'd like to get something done sooner rather than later, but he can't pressure the player or his camp, so they're just going to have to ride that out, wait it out. What about Mikko Rantanen and the Carolina Hurricanes, right? He's on a test drive right now in Carolina. If he doesn't see his fit long term, maybe he wants to explore what's open on the open market of free agency. Is that a player that St. Louis might have interest in? Now, the tricky part of free agency is that's exactly what it is. And when you're talking about top level unrestricted free agent players, they all want to go where the money is, and they want to go where they have a chance to win. So what does St. Louis look like at that point in the offseason? And we're just not going to know that. We're not going to know that. But I do think, like every other team that is sort of stumbling and wobbling a little bit, I think that St. Louis would like to add a meaningful piece. It's just real hard to make it work.
He's Darren Dreger. Find his great work over at TSN. Follow him on Twitter at Darren Dreger. Dregs, this is always great, man. Thanks so much for catching up with us today. Enjoy the Four Nations face-off tomorrow night. Should be an unbelievable event there. We'll talk with you again soon, my friend.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Darren. That's Darren Dreger, one of the best in the business. Always appreciate him catching up with us here on BK and Ferrario. Again, if you missed any of that conversation, check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. That's presented by
Schaefer Door Company.
Alex, your biggest takeaway, I want to talk about this a little bit more on the other side, but your biggest takeaway from our conversation with Darren Dreger is what?
I think it's the return on Brayden Schenn. And frankly, it's the bigger picture of what he talked about with this team, meaning do they want to add a star? What does their team look like in the offseason? How do they view this trade deadline? I think it all starts with a Brayden Schenn, and the return that he signified really tells you where this team could be potentially at, and I've kind of got a tinfoil with the Brayden Schenn possibility on the other side.
Let's get into that coming up on the other side. Hear from you guys as well. 314-399-9646. That's the Air Comfort Service text line. What did you guys think of that interview, that conversation with Darren Dreger? YouTube is available for you at youtube.com/101 ESPN STL. We'll hear from you. Give you our thoughts on that next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Tomorrow night here on 101 ESPN, we'll have the Four Nations Championship game as USA takes on Canada. We'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with puck drop at 7. And don't forget, if you missed our conversation with TSN NHL insider Darren Dreger, we'll have that posted on the podcast page after the show today as he catches us up on all the latest rumors surrounding Brayden Schenn and the St. Louis Blues. The Sports Update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at Londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
I would say lower than that. I can't imagine the Toronto Maple Leafs would entertain that, with all due respect to Brayden Schenn. I mean, Matthew Nyes is a big part of the future of the Toronto Maple. And this might be a tough one from Toronto's standpoint, would be somebody like Fraser Minten. They've got a good developing prospect in Danforth in the American League of Defensemen. And again, maybe that draft pick, or maybe it's another piece, something off their roster to make the dollars make some sense as well.
That was Darren Dreger on with us just a little bit ago. If you missed any of our conversation with Dregs, be sure to check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you can go to find that. Alex, you said you got a tinfoil theory from what Dreg said about what a potential package could be for the Blues if they decided to make that move with the Toronto Maple Leafs. What is that?
So maybe it's because I'm stuck on this Matthew Nyes thing, but the fact that he brought up a Fraser Minten kind of tells me that if that's the case, and the Blues are going to play hardball with this if they want to trade, and honestly, they're going to force Toronto to say, no, we're not doing that. But Toronto was higher on this Fraser Minten when they drafted him than what they were on Matthew Nyes when they drafted him. Now, Nyes was in the second round in 21. Minten was 22. And I know what Dregs just said, and I take his word as gospel when it comes to something like this. But my tinfoil here is if the Blues are calling and saying, look, we want one of your top young players, and ideally it's looking at Matthew Nyes. My tinfoil is if I'm Toronto, I don't want to give that guy up because he's performed at the NHL level. But if I'm them, I view this as it's going to suck to give that up, but we've got this other kid that we are super high on that we believe is a top 6 forward. And when we've got Austin Matthews, when we've got Mitch Marner, when we've got William Nylander, we could put any young player in the top 6 and they're going to have success. So maybe we have to cough that up to acquire a guy like Brayden Schenn. Not saying it's going to happen. It's a total tinfoil here. But as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when you and I discussed this, BK, it really comes down to how desperate is a team like Toronto to push through. And that's where I still wonder if Matthew Nyes could be the option.
It just doesn't make sense to me because, like, Fraser Minten is playing 12 minutes a night for them right now. This is a team that's going all in. If you're trading for Brayden Schenn, it's because you're all in on this year. You don't know what the future is for Mitch Marner. Like, Tavares is very much in question. You've got a lot of guys on these one-year deals. You're pushing for 2025 to win the Stanley Cup that has been so elusive for your franchise. Elevating Fraser Minten at 20 years old to that potential top line to play alongside Austin Matthews and you're all in year, that just seems like a disaster waiting to happen in the playoffs.
Well, I think the guy that gets elevated to that top line that plays in the playoffs is Brayden Schenn, and that's what you're hoping to push for.
But you're trading for Schenn to help you at center. True. That's the whole stated reason as to why they're making this move.
I think you're trading for Schenn so that you can push John Tavares down to the center position and you have more strength in your top 6 that plays to the style that wins in the postseason.
Yes. Potentially. The reason that I've heard from all of the people that are covering the team, though, is that they need that second line center. And Brayden Schenn, they view as being that guy. Mm-hmm. That is the reason why they're targeting him over anybody else that could be available at the deadline. So to me, if you're doing that, it just doesn't make sense to trade a guy that has 21 goals for you. Yeah. Like I think it's kind of crazy that they would do that. Yeah. Maybe they will, like Boston just pissed off their third baseman. That is one of the best hitters in the league because they wanted to sign Alex Bregman. And now they've got this controversy between the two players that are both making, $25-30 million a year. So teams do stuff that doesn't make sense to me, and sometimes that's just the way that they operate. But to me, it would just be crazy. And I honestly want to spend too much time on Matthew Nyes because I can't see it happening. If it happens, I'll be blown away, and then we can discuss it. But I think it's almost kind of like a pie in the sky type of thing. It's also this scouting report on Fraser Minten, who was brought up by Darren Dreger as a potential option for the Blues if they were to trade Brayden Schenn to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Fraser Minten's 20 years old. He's a center prospect for the Maple Leafs. He's mostly been playing fourth line / going down to the AHL. Here's the final takeaway from The Athletic on his prospect profile. Quote, his numbers don't pop, but he does play a very level-headed style of game. He knows who he is. He plays the full 200 foot. He knows where to be and what to do when he's on the ice, especially as a real supportive lineman. He also has added a good size to his frame through hard work and is a known pro body player. His game is more about the know-how than individual skill, and his offensive ceiling will always be relatively low accordingly. That sounds like Jake Neighbors to me. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a center version of Jake Neighbors. That's not a bad guy to have in my lineup. In fact, I think that sounds like a prototypical third-line center. Like maybe you get him, and that avoids the Trent Frederick market that you've talked about so much during the offseason, Alex. So instead of paying $5 or $6 million, you get that guy for $1 million for the next 3 or 4 years, and boom, you're feeling pretty good about that. It allows you that cap space to go make the big move in the offseason. That's part of this conversation. But to me, that's the kind of thing that you're probably getting in return for Brayden Schenn, much more so than a guy that has 21 goals in his first 51 games.
Yeah, well, and that if that's what the return is, that's a massive return for a Brayden Schenn. That's the mammoth that Darren Dreger was talking about. And mind you, what we talked about in the open, if that deal were to be pulled off, that doesn't mean that guy is just ready to be a Blue right away. That guy could also get flipped in the offseason. Like, this is the asset accumulation that they're trying to focus on. And that was my other big takeaway from what Dregs was telling us. What he said there about the Blues trying to acquire a star player and what does the team look like for their ability to acquire a star player, if that's what Doug Armstrong and company believe is the missing piece, and I don't know this to be a fact, but let's just say that they view this as, hey, we need a star. We need a sniper. We need somebody in our top line that can make us dangerous. Well, you've got to set the team up so that they look decent enough in that free agency market. And that's where the task is really going to come into the Blues this trade deadline / the beginning of offseason before free agency opens up. Getting rid of lofty contracts, getting some of these younger players playing time so that you can see what Dvorsky looks like, what a Snuggerud looks like, so that other players, when you try and sell them on St. Louis, this is the blueprint of what we have. There's no more question marks. There's no more gray clouds. It's black and white. This is what we have. And I do wonder if that's what Doug Armstrong's trying to accomplish right now, because Pagnotta was the one that just reported it for the fourth period, that apparently the Blues were one of the most active teams during this Four Nations break in terms of working the phones.
And I would expect that. I fully anticipate. I don't know what they'll get done because that requires two teams, right? The Cardinals this offseason wanted to trade Nolan Arenado, but they were limited. Why? Because he has a full no-trade clause. Well, guess what? Most of the players that the Blues are trying to trade have full no-trade clauses. So those guys that they're trying to move get to decide where they go or if they go. Maybe Brayden Schenn says, hey, I don't want to move during the season. Let me move in the offseason. If you're going to do this, allow me the opportunity to have the summer to think on it, to be able to look at my options, and then you can present to me in July what you have on the table, and then we can talk. Maybe Pavel Buchnevich says, hey, you sold me on something last offseason. I don't want to move. Justin Falk, man, I live in Minnesota. I signed this extension with the Blues because I want to be in the Midwest. Maybe Ryan Suter says, I exclusively play for Central teams. If you can't find a Central team, I'm out. So it's entirely possible they can't get anything done at the deadline. It's in play, but they're going to try. They're going to try to make this team into something that it allows for flexibility in the offseason. I don't know what they're going to try to do this offseason. My guess is probably try to overhaul this thing in a pretty meaningful way. But to get there, it requires some of this stuff happening at this year's trade deadline. So I thought, to me, Alex, my biggest takeaway from it was him saying that Brayden Schenn has a terrific contract and he has high value across the league. He added, why wouldn't you be attracted to Brayden Schenn? The, quote, interest level is high, end quote. For anybody, including our friend Dom over at The Athletic, that said this contract was one of the worst in the league and it's aging poorly.
Stop believing Dom.
I did like hearing how others view him. And the reason why is because that puts it in a different light of what you could potentially get in return. And it's why if you're Army, you got to listen.
Yeah. Well, and it's why if I'm Army, I'm not just trading him to get a first-round draft pick in a mid-level. I'm not going to go, no disrespect to him, I'm not going to go trade for a Zach Dean that may or may not make the NHL. No. If I'm moving him, I'm getting something that's going to be on my NHL team next year. Otherwise, I'm going to keep Brayden Schenn.
Or something that has a ton of value to somebody else. That allows me to then go get that player that you're talking about. So either way, you've got to either get the current ready-made thing, or the thing that gets you that current ready-made
This
thing.
isn't going to be the trade deadline of 2 years ago when they traded O'Reilly and Tarasenko and just got late first-round draft picks. If they do, my guess would be those picks are going to be flipped at the draft. But this is not going to be, oh, really, you got a second-round pick. This is going to be, if you see moves, it's going to be, what does that look like for next year?
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. Coming up next, you guys can check us out on YouTube as well, youtube.com/101ESPN STL. Let's get to your questions. If you guys have anything stemming from, especially that Darren Dreger interview or something else in sports, including maybe for T-Bone, his Illini stink apparently at this point in time. If you guys have any questions, we'll get to that next here on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, you got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is the Your Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. You can get them in on the YouTube chat as well, at youtube.com/101ESPN. That's where Bojangles and Ryan and Cat Dad Gamer, J-Rock.
Love Bojangles.
They're all over there hanging out right now. You could do that too at youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. All right, from the 801. Guys, yesterday, the Fastlane fellas talked about how baseball is a bit boring now, and that's why people don't watch. Just curious, do you also think that baseball has become a boring sport, or do you believe that there are other issues that are causing the viewership problem? So let's start out with this. Reject the premise.
Fastlane.
BK answer.
Fastlane out here trying to make some enemies, I see.
Baseball doesn't have a viewership problem. Much to the chagrin of people that will talk about this, it actually doesn't have any kind of viewership issues. Now, nationally, it is not viewed the same way that the NFL is. Locally, baseball is incredibly healthy. Baseball locally gets great viewership. They have a problem with blackouts, and they have a problem with the scope of where their games can be viewed, but within those viewership areas, it's doing really well, man. It's why people continue to get into the local TV game with baseball. 162 games is great for these TV partners because it's just a ton of inventory every night, basically, throughout the baseball season. You got a game to put on TV, so it just provides a ton of content. So locally, baseball does exceptionally well. As for the actual question, has baseball become a bit boring? I think baseball has a yesteryear problem similar to basketball. Basketball is just different than it once was. Basketball is threes and dunks. Some people like that. A lot of people really don't. Aesthetically, it's not particularly pleasing to watch. Baseball has a problem of walks and homers. It's the best thing for the game. To win, that's the best way to win. The way that in basketball, the best way to win is by shooting threes and by dunking the basketball. High percentage shot at the rim, threes count more than twos. Just a math problem eventually. For baseball, what do you need to do to win? Well, you need to get on base, and then you need to score them. The best way to do that, hit the ball over the fence because it's so freaking hard to hit a round ball, squaring it up. How do you fix that? I don't know, man. It seemed like a couple of years ago, some of the rule changes that they implemented helped. And then last year, the batting average plummeted right back down to where it was before those rule changes. So I have no idea what the answer is, but it's more a I remember when problem than it is a baseball is boring problem. The actual product's pretty damn good. It's just not the way that it once was, and people miss what it once was, for better or for worse.
So back to the juice is what I'm understanding. If we want excitement back,
sure.
Back to the juice. Honestly, a step forward for the baseball, if they want to try and make it a little bit more entertaining, would be a salary cap. Because I think part of the reason it's so boring is there's three mammoth teams, and then there's everybody else. And I don't know if it fixes a lot of the teams that just don't want to spend money, but at least it forces teams to spend enough money, and you don't have these power teams that make the season boring.
That's probably also a really important thing to hit on, Alex. I'm glad you did. It's not just like the actual individual games that people find to be boring. It's scope out, 30,000-foot view. Everybody knows who's winning the World Series this year.
Yep.
Right? That's the perspective that people have. Okay, the Dodgers are so much better than everybody else. How can you compete? And so it does become almost this basketball problem where basketball has an 82-game regular season. Everybody knows who's going to end up in the NBA Finals. We get there, and it's like, what was the 105 games for? That's now exponentially higher. What were the first 200 games of the season for when we all knew who was going to be there at the end? It's tough to have that kind of investment as a fan where I'm watching hundreds of hours of baseball over the year.
Yeah, and I think that's where most of the hate comes from baseball right now, not so much the product, because I agree. I don't think the product is boring. Now, they do have still a 3 true outcome problem, but I think the only way that you're going to fix that is by potentially pushing the mound back. I don't know how else you're going to get there, but at some point, baseball will have to have that conversation. Baseball was boring like when I started here 5 years ago. Like when 2021, 2022, you had no pitch clock. You would go minutes without a ball being put in play. The human rain.
Gio. I remember Nomar Garcia Parra that would take 15 minutes to get back into the damn batter's box.
Yeah. And
adjust the gloves. Now kick off the shoes. Now let's get something with the bait.
I'm still like, baseball's my favorite sport to watch and cover. And it was then, but even then I knew it was boring because like I'd have to make a pot of coffee before a game to get through 3.5 hours. Now it's better. Now now they are trying to get a little bit back towards what you're talking about, BK, of like looking back of like the yesteryear. Because think about it, base running's up, the stolen base is kind of back, and they're trying to find a way. They don't know how to get there, but they're trying to find a way to bring the starting pitcher back into the game. So baseball's trying to get back to that spot. I think the product itself is fine. It's more about where you're seeing all the elite talent end up, which is the biggest problem.
For sure. Consolidation on the coast. All right, from the 314, why not keep Nolan Arenado and trade Nolan Gorman, in your guys' opinion?
Because one's 34 and the other's 22, 23.
Agreed.
I'm not trading Nolan Gorman unless I'm getting a star back in return that is already MLB proven.
Yeah, the truth is, Nolan Gorman gives you an out. He could potentially be a 35 home run hitter. I don't know if he gets there. I understand the skepticism by everybody. That's why you don't trade him. Because left-handed power with the ability to hit 35 home runs doesn't grow on trees. It's really hard to find, especially when you can get that dude and he doesn't have to play in a corner. If I can get that guy playing at second base, whew, it's hard to find, man. It's really, really hard to find. So that's why. From the 314, guys, Jamie Rivers said this morning on TMA that if you trade Brayden Schenn, you should essentially trade everybody with term and tear it down to the studs. What are your thoughts on that?
Robert Thomas?
Alex, let's go ahead and talk about that coming up on the other side. Does trading Brayden Schenn necessitate a full-blown rebuild for the St. Louis Blues? Is that what it would signal? I think we have some differing thoughts on this. We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex and T-Bone on BK. So somebody in the chat, 314-399-9646, asked us a question, Alex. Jamie said yesterday on the Fast Lane, if the Blues trade Brayden Schenn, that would ignite a full-blown rebuild in his mind. I love that they asked this question because it's something that we had planned on talking about anyway. So we have this audio, actually, from yesterday. Jamie on the Fast Lane saying that if you trade Brayden Schenn, it ignites a rebuild. Let's add all of the context in here just to make sure that we don't misquote anything here.
If you trade Brayden Schenn, then you might as well trade Justin Falk, Nick Leddy. Like, why are you hanging on to all the veteran players then? Because what you're going to get for Brayden Schenn is prospects and maybe draft capital. Because if the Toronto Maple Leafs are the other team involved, they're not giving you anything back that's good because they're trying to win a Stanley Cup. So you're going to get a whole bunch of players that a lot of people have never heard of. And they're probably going to be some really good young prospects. But if you're doing that, you're not even on the other side of the retool. You're back into a rebuild.
Yeah.
At that moment. That sounds the bell of a rebuild if you trade your captain for a bunch of prospects. And if you do that, I'll say it again, you got to look at moving Justin Falk. You got to look at moving Nick Leddy. You got to kick the tires on what Ryan Suter gets for you out there. Like, you don't need any of the veteran guys anymore. You're doing this rebuild and you're handing the team off to younger bodies, younger people in the locker room.
Do you agree with him?
I don't. I disagree with that. And I understand where he's coming from because you are getting another young player who, in the guy that Darren Dreger brought up is a guy who has strictly played in juniors hockey, or a guy that's played 20 games in the American Hockey League. So he hasn't even tasted the NHL yet. But I view that
Fraser cat, though, he's played in the NHL.
Fraser Min, he's gotten a couple of games in the NHL. There's another one, the defenseman's played all in the AHL. So, you're getting prospects. You're getting a draft pick, unless one team gets super desperate. But I don't look at that as a full rebuild. I look at this as you're handing the keys over to the next core of players. And not to sound rude, but all of those guys that he said you'd be moving away from, I think that actually benefits this Blues team. Justin Falk, that opens up a top 4 spot. Honestly, Justin Falk's been playing third pair for you for the last couple of weeks. That puts Matt Kessel back in your lineup. You take Nick Leddy out. Well, you played almost the whole season without Nick Leddy, and look what happened. Tyler Tucker emerged as a top 6 defenseman for you. If you move on from Ryan Suter, does that suck? Absolutely. But it opens up more playing time for the younger guys that are supposed to be getting that NHL opportunity. I went back because when he said this yesterday, I was thinking, it's like, man, I actually think that there are teams that have traded or moved on from their captain that went on to have success. And so here are some of the teams that came to mind for me. One was the New York Islanders. Now, they didn't trade him, but they had John Tavares as their captain, and they said, nope, we're going to go a different direction. Matt Barzal's here. We feel like this guy can get us. They moved on from him in that free agency season, the 2017-2018 offseason. The next 3 years, the Islanders made the playoffs, and 1 year they made it to the conference final. The other 2, they made it to the second round. Calgary Flames, when they traded away Jerome McGinley back in 2013-2014 season. Captain, they missed the playoffs that year. But the next 3 years, they made the playoffs in 3 of the 4. So the next 4, they made the playoffs in 3 of them. Philadelphia Flyers traded away Mike Richards, who was a captain for them. That was in an offseason. They made the playoffs that year, got to the second round, and they made the playoffs 3 of the next 5 years. I actually look at this as the other side. I think if they're moving on from Brayden Schenn, they're looking at this group of players saying, Robert Thomas, you're 25 years old. Jordan Kyrou, you're 26 years old. You are now the players in charge of this team to have success. Sounds a lot like what they did when they moved on from David Backes in free agency, where they said, Petro's our captain, we've got Steen, we're ready to hand the reins over to another group of players that can take this team to the next level. And I think that's what they trying to accomplish by moving on from Brayden Schenn.
So I actually think it could go in the other direction, because part of trading Schenn, yes, you get assets in return. That's huge. And Brayden Schenn's a good hockey player. We should probably mention this just because we haven't yet in this segment. If the Blues were a solid team and they were ready to win, I in no way, shape, or form would be advocating for any of this. Yeah. Because Schenn's a guy that you would want to build around right now, because he's a good player and a good leader and a good dude, frankly. Just likes living in St. Louis, has been a great ambassador for the team.
Totally.
All of our conversations with Schenn have been nothing but great. This is nothing about animosity or anything, but when you have a national analyst like Darren Dreger saying, hey, there's a ton of interest out there, the return could be mammoth, in his words, yeah, you at least got to kick the tires around. So anyways, I want to say that on the front end. If you trade Schenn, Falk, Leddy, and Suter, which, by the way, the only guy on there that I'm really like opposed to trading is Schenn, that's $17 to $19 million. 17 of that is for next year's cap.
Yeah.
Where you
Even
already
if
have
you
10.
retain salary, if you retain 50% of those salaries, okay, I've got $9 million that I'm adding to next year's books that I could potentially use. I can go out there and get a legit star free agent with that kind of money, man. And so now I'm filling in my lineup just to do this real quick. Okay, it's on the top line. One of the stars that I decided to sign via free agency, I'm going to plug in. This does not mean this is going to be the case, but Rantanen or Marner on that top line, okay? Because that's what I can get with $9 million in savings now. They've already got cap space. Add in $9 million. Boom, let's go spend it. One of those two with Thomas and Buchnevich. Second line, Holloway, Dvorsky, Kyrou. Third line, Neighbors, Mitten, Snuggerud. Fourth line is what you have already, Walker, Foxa/Sonny, whoever, and then Toropchenko. Does that sound significantly worse than what you have right now? Now, it's younger, it's less proven, and the floor is definitely lower.
Absolutely.
It might not work, but that's my core. That's what it should look like whenever I'm good again, is something similar to that. And then you look defensively, and it's like, man, if I'm just being honest, I think I can get the production that I'm currently able to get out of Leddy and Falk defensively out of Tucker and a random free agent that I'm paying $4 million a year.
And to reiterate, again, there's no animosity here, but I think Nick Leddy became expendable once they acquired Cam Fowler.
Sure.
They acquired Cam Fowler because Doug Armstrong even said in his press conference.
He replaced him.
Yeah, he said, look, I'm planning on Leddy not coming back, which is why we're acquiring Cam Fowler. And Fowler came in, and look at the goal production he's produced. Look at the offensive production he's produced. So going into next season, in my opinion, I look at that top four and I say, cool, Fowler, Parayko, Broberg, and then if he's here, Justin Falk. But if you're moving on from that, you're opening up that cap space, and now you're entering a Matt Kessel, a Tyler Tucker, and then if you're opening up $19 million, you can go out there and find another defenseman that fits into your top four or your top six. I don't view this as you're about to blow it up and be a team that's picking first overall for the next 3 years. I actually view this as opportunistic for the Blues to say, hey, this core isn't working. And once again, Doug Armstrong said that in the press conference, like, we need to look at the players that have been here for the long amount of time. And these are the guys that we just mentioned that have been here for 4+ years and the struggles have continued. That's opportunistic to say, hey, we just opened up $19+ million. We've got roster spaces that now our younger players can get some experience in. And if we feel like we need upgrades, well, we go out there and we find a way to make upgrades.
And Alex, I want to be open to the possibility that it does get worse, because it could.
Yeah.
Like, it absolutely, what Jamie is saying, there's a perspective where he ends up being 100% right. And next year they have the #1 overall pick because none of this worked, and we find out Dvorsky wasn't ready to be in the top 6. He's not even a third-line center, much less a second-line center. And it's possible that Mitten is playing 12 minutes a night right now for the Toronto Maple Leafs because that's all he's capable of at the NHL level right now. And there's not another step for Booch or Bolduc or Neighbors, and this is just what they are. And Snuggerud, yeah, he was a good college player. Maybe for whatever reason, it doesn't translate to the NHL level. Sometimes that happens. There is a ton of uncertainty here.
Yeah, well, to put that into perspective real quick, BK, they traded away Taylor Hall, the Edmonton Oilers, on the other side of this when they were thinking like, nope, this isn't it. And then they were awful that year. They drafted Connor McDavid and they drafted top 10 4 times in the next 6 years.
Yeah, it could go in the other direction. Like, it absolutely could. Here's the thing. You're already there, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we're talking about this team as if they're on the cusp of a playoff spot. They're not. The St. Louis Blues, as of today, have 55 points during the regular season. That is tied for the 6th worst in the NHL, guys. They are 3 points away from picking today in the top 5. That game against Seattle, when they come back from break, is huge. Because Seattle is 3 points ahead of the Blues, or worse than the Blues, however you want to look at it, for that #5 overall selection. So the Blues are already in retool, rebuild, classify it whatever the hell you want to. Right now, they're bad. And this is a team that's being torn down potentially for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it's failed as currently constructed. So I do think that's a perspective that also should be shared. As much as you don't want to go into a rebuild, man, you can call it whatever you want. Eventually, you are what your record says you are. The Blues this year are playing like a rebuilding team. The teams around them are Pittsburgh, Montreal, Anaheim, Utah, Seattle. These teams are rebuilding.
Yeah. Well, but my perspective, if you call yourself a team in the rebuild, is I'm planning on being bad for the next 10 years.
That's a tank.
Yeah.
So I view it as there's different levels to this. Tanking, rebuilding, retooling, building for the future, and then boom, contending. Those, to me, are the levels that you can have as a team.
Yeah.
And you can live in any of those spectrums, but you can't lie to yourself about where you're at. The Blues, I don't think, will ever get to the place of tanking. They are somewhere teetering right now between rebuild and retool.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to avoid the rebuild by being bad for the next couple of years, which is why you're trying to be aggressive in the sense of we need to make sweeping changes with the team so that we avoid going into the 4th straight year of missing the playoffs, the 5th straight year of missing the playoffs.
I'm with you. And I think personally, the best way forward is to change up this core. Like, set Brayden Schenn aside for a second because I know he's a hot button issue, and I totally understand the perspective of not trading him. I really do. Falk, Leddy, and Suter, I really don't if you get calls on those three and they're real and like teams are willing to take on those contracts without you adding in some kind of an asset for them to take them, dude, that to me is, you got to do that.
Yeah.
That is not a tank. That is not a rebuild. That is a good hockey move for you. And I know it's one of those things. One of the Royals managers growing up said, as the Royals were going through another 100-loss season, never say it can't get worse. And guess what? It did indeed get worse for the Kansas City Royals. It can get worse from Justin Falk. I promise you. We've seen it. Might get worse at less than $6.5 million a year, though. And that, to me, allows for a little bit of flexibility, which then maybe you can get elite somewhere else. I think that's a smart move, personally.
I do, too.
That's not something I'm afraid of.
No. Do you want to get rid of Brayden Schenn? Absolutely not. Do you want to move on from some of the players that are on this team? I think if you're the front office, you're probably telling yourself, I think we have to. Because we've had 3 straight years, speaking of the Blues, we've had 3 straight years of not just missing the playoffs, but potentially drafting in the top 10. Because last year, I know they drafted 16th overall, but that was when they went on that run when Drew Bannister took over. Yeah. Otherwise, you're talking about another top 10 pick. And when you're drafted in the top 10 3 times, when it's the same core, again, I'll go back to reference what Doug said in the offseason last year, where it's like, we're going to have to look at this defensive core because I'm not sure we can come back with the same group. He made sweeping changes. And I wonder if they're looking at this saying, look, this is the 3rd straight year your offense has been bottom half of the National Hockey League, and it's been the same guys. We can't run it back with the same group.
Somebody on the text line brought up 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. Hate to break it to you guys, but they're not getting calls on those defensemen. Probably true. But we're just going down this hypothetical scenario where Jamie mentioned, hey, if you're trading Schenn, you might as well go ahead and trade all of these other guys as well, which my response when I heard that was, cool, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. I'm in. I think there are separate categories here. Falk and Leddy, let's do it. Suter's I don't know. I'm okay with him being here.
Look, I don't know if you're good.
I'm fine with Suter being back next year at another like $1 million with a couple of $1 million in incentives. I've got no problem with that.
Even if you trade Ryan Suter, there's a realistic chance he's coming back to this team because the guy only wants to play for Midwest teams. He wants to play for the Central Division. So if you trade him, it's like, hey, Ryan, we want you to go get a chance at the Stanley Cup. And then it's like, okay, cool, but I'm coming back to the Midwest. And it's like, cool, we'll re-sign you at the end of this year.
It's the Sonny thing, right?
Yeah.
You always knew Sonny was coming back.
Yeah.
Didn't know when.
Yeah, but you knew what was happening.
How long it was going to take, but he was coming back to St. Louis eventually.
And I'd say the same thing with Radek Faksa. Do I want to trade that guy? No, probably not, because I kind of like how he comes out every single game where he's pissed off. But do you look at him and say, hey, we want you to go get a shot at winning a Stanley Cup,
sure,
and then let's talk in the offseason again?
Yeah, we'll bring him back. $1.5 million, be our 4th line center,
and hopefully
again.
Our team will be a little bit more prepared to compete next year.
In the meantime, hey man, go have fun, go play in the playoffs again.
I think he said that about Noel Acciari when he traded him. Doug Armstrong did, to where he said, like, we told Noel, like, look, this was a disappointing year. We didn't expect it to turn out this way, so we want you to go win. Go for it.
He was great when he was here.
Yeah.
And then he went to Toronto.
He was okay for them. And then he went to Pittsburgh, and, Pittsburgh was pretty bad.
He went to Toronto, and they didn't win.
They got bumped.
He won in the regular season, but, the playoffs happened, and we know what happens in the playoffs, which is why they're trying to trade for Brayden Schenn.
Which Matthew Nyes was on that team, and they still lost, so you probably need to move on from him.
It's
going to happen. It's going to happen.
No more Matthew Nyes.
Oh, no, it's going to happen, and I will celebrate.
I like this Fraser Mitten thing. It makes sense to me. He's one of their top 3 prospects in the organization.
Never really liked the TV show Frasier, though, so.
He spells it different.
Now that is a...
Does he?
Yep, he does.
How does he spell it?
Fraser.
Isn't that how Frasier was spelled?
I think it's Frazier.
I thought there was a Z.
I never watched the show, so I have no idea.
Frasier.
The show's pretty solid. I can't believe you hate on that show.
I didn't hate on it. I just didn't
I'm
like
not
it.
a big Frasier guy.
Yeah, it wasn't. Maybe I wasn't smart enough to
Because he's
understand
in
Frasier.
radio?
I don't know. It just wasn't. It wasn't for me. Seinfeld, I'm in. I could watch Seinfeld.
That's good.
Everybody loves Raymond. Even
That's
I can
Raymond.
watch that. But
Let's trade for a guy named Raymond. Lucas Raymond.
Ray Ferraro. We should have him on the show.
I love
soon.
Ray Ferraro. Big R.
With Alex and T-Bone on BK. Coming up next, more likely to happen here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for more likely to happen. You give us 2 scenarios. We'll tell you which one is more likely here on BK and Ferrario. Alex, let's start out with this one. More likely to happen. Wilson Contreras hits at least 30 home runs this year, or Mason Wynn has at least 25 stolen bases this season. Mason Wynn talked the other day about how much he was hoping to implement more speed into his game. He said he was disappointed by his lack of stolen bases a year ago.
I'm going to go with Wilson Contreras hitting 30 home runs. And it's not because I don't think Mason Wynn can get there. I just know how stolen bases can go. And as much as you want to try and add speed, sometimes you're not going to complete the stolen base. Sometimes you're just not going to be getting on base. And then the injury plagues comes into this one. What I know for certain, especially the 15 pounds of muscle Wilson Contreras has added, that dude is going to mash the home run ball. So I'm going to stay more likely he hits 30.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean towards Contreras as well. I mean, you've seen the pure power that he has, and now he's even bigger. I think there's a better chance he gets there. And again, I'm not doubting Wynn, but as I look at Wynn's numbers throughout the minor leagues, like he started off great with the stolen base number with 43 in 2022. Then he got to AAA, and it got slowed down a little bit to 17, and then 11 last year.
17 in 100 games.
Yeah, I still don't think he's going to be implementing the running game as much. I think he'll be like 20. I don't know if he'll get up to 25.
I'm going to say Mason Wynn. And this is twofold. One, I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities, despite my own belief that he should be batting 7th, 8th, 9th in the lineup. Again, not because I hate Mason Wynn. I just think it works better for the Cardinals lineup. I think he's probably going to start out as your leadoff hitter, which is going to give him a ton of plate appearances, and that means he's just going to be on base a lot. Last year, he had 157 hits, and he added along with that 41 walks. So he was on base roughly 200 times. So that's 200 opportunities potentially to steal a base. Now, he had some doubles and triples, so it's closer like 150 real opportunities for him to steal a base. Can you do that 25 times? I think he's capable of that. You look down in the minors, to T-Bone's point, 32 stolen bases in his first year in the minor leagues, 43 in his second year. I think he's going to try to get back to that. So I'll say it's more likely Mason Wynn gets to 25 stolen bases. It's possible you could have a 25 stolen base, 15 home run guy for the Cardinals this year at shortstop. I wonder how many shortstops have done that in recent years.
Just like me trying to make Matthew Nyes work.
Baseball or for the Cardinals?
Baseball.
BK's
Can't imagine it's a long list. 25 steals, 15 homers, adding in a gold glove. It's a pretty good player.
Just like I keep trying to make Matthew Nyes work.
Keep adding elements to this. Gold glove too?
This guy keeps trying to make Mason Wynn as a superstar work.
I know.
Guys, more likely.
I'm tired of both of you trying to make them work, okay?
I'm tired of both of you being optimistic about these St. Louis teams.
We both suck, okay?
Guys, more likely to happen. The Blues draft a future star or they add a current star this offseason.
Does the draft have to be like this draft or just draft in general?
This draft.
So
yeah, I'm going this offseason.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think it's draft. I want it to be sign.
Well, and I said add this offseason. Could be a trade.
Yeah. I would rather that side. Which one is more likely to actually happen? Speaking with my head, not my heart, I think it is draft. Because I think there's a really good chance they end up with a top 5 selection.
I think that's where I am, too. I would prefer that they try going and get the established route because then you don't need to go through. I mean, even some stars go through growing pains. Like, look at Mishkov in Philly. Now, maybe he doesn't become a star.
Well, that's John Tortorella pains right now.
Well, that's fair. But I think that's the likelier route because I agree. I think they're probably going to be picking in the top 5. So they'll probably try that route. And I still think they're going to look at their internal guys first, like Snuggerud, Dvorsky. I think they're going to wait out this process, see what those guys look like before they then potentially have to pivot and say, let's go get a guy.
I'm actually going to say it's more likely that they add it this offseason because here's my tinfoil with this. If you get a top 5 pick, you're keeping it. If it's not a top 5 pick from everything I've heard and read, beyond 5 is typically about fringe top of the lineup players. I think that 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th overall pick could get traded for a current star to another team that's like, man, we're just not really happy with where this is at. Maybe we need to embrace it a little bit more. That's where I wonder if the Blues go if they don't get a top 5 pick. And I'm going to go play with the odds here that you don't get a top 5 pick. So I'll say it's more likely that you're adding it this offseason.
Do you want to hear the list of players that have had at least 15 home runs and 25 stolen bases in a season and played primarily at shortstop?
And got a gold glove?
I've been trying to run through it in my head, and I have no idea.
There's a lot of shortstops that have done it lately.
De La Cruz did it?
Ellie didn't. Ellie did it last year.
Okay.
There were actually 5 shortstops last year that did this.
Dansby Swanson do it.
Pretty amazing. Bobby Wood Jr., Francisco Lindor, C.J. Abrams, Ellie De La Cruz, and Zach Neto actually did this last year. Trey Turner has done it 5 times.
That makes sense.
Hold on. Who the hell's Zach Neto?
Diamondbacks, isn't it?
I think he's with the Angels. Yeah, Angels.
Oh, well, that explains it.
He was a 5-1 player last year. Legitimately really good player for them.
Wow.
Trey Turner's done it 5 times. Wander Franco did it. Fernando Tatis Jr., Bo Bichette, Jonathan Villar, Trevor Story, Tim Anderson, Elvis Andrews, end of list in the last decade. Jimmy Rollins did this 6 different times in his career.
Hey, somebody smart on this show compared him to Jimmy Rollins.
That is the guy that I think Mason Wynn can become. T-Bone, what do you got for us?
Guys more likely to be traded at their respective trade deadline, Brayden Schenn or Nolan Arenado?
Nolan Arenado. I think the Doug Armstrong is going to be asking for too much for Brayden Schenn. And I think the teams are going to say, no, we just can't do it. And they revisit it in the offseason. I think if Nolan Arenado has any type of bounce-back season, somebody's going to come calling and say, Nolan, we want you on our team.
But if he bounces back, are the Cardinals in it?
I'm going through my Rolodex right now, and I'm struggling to think of somebody. Who was the last player with term and this much money that got traded at the deadline the way that Arenado could potentially? Not a guy going through arbitration, but somebody that had, like, real money left on his deal. That's why I think it's really tough to envision that happening with Nolan Arenado. Those in baseball are really hard trades to make. So I think it is probably actually Brayden Schenn that is more likely to be traded at their deadline.
Well, dang you. I was going to say Arenado, but now that you've raised that question, like I am thinking in my head.
I just can't think of guys with $30 million left in multiple seasons of control.
No, but I can think of a team that can say, man, who cares? We need a guy that gets us over the top.
Sure.
And it'd be the Dodgers or the Yankees.
Yeah.
And they're on his list. So if it happens,
yeah, all of the teams on his list that are willing to eat as much money as possible.
Yeah, I still think I'm going to go towards Arenado because there is no cap ramification to it. Like there is no, hey, we have to make sure we're under this amount. And I think Alex is right. Like if there are teams that could do this as you get in season and they need a third baseman, they're not going to sniff at the money. Like if the Mets, like they've got Vientos playing third, but like if Vientos got hurt, like it wouldn't shock me if Steve Cohen said, yeah, go get that guy. He's playing like an MVP. So I would say that. I think all the Schenn stuff is going to lead to the offseason because that is a league where you really don't see money get moved at the trade deadline when there's multiple years of term left.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Coverage Service text line from the 573. More likely to happen, Gorman gets pulled from the lineup this year because of the strikeout problems, or Walker is pulled from the field because he's a liability defensively.
Oh, I'm going to go Walker gets pulled from the field because he's a liability defensively. I think Ollie's going to be fine with the strikeouts. If there's a problem defensively, Ollie's pulling that. He's yanking out that cane any day of the week to get him off the field.
You also have an obvious replacement. You go to the outfield and
Michael Hellman.
What? No. Newbar can play right. Donovan plays left. Gorman, you're at second. Boom, Walker at DH. That's the clear. You can just move those pieces pretty easily. I think it's Walker in the field as well.
I think so too. And my whole thought process, I didn't even get to the whole like move the puzzle pieces around. Walker's a DH. It's just Ollie is always a guy that seems to have leaned defense first. And I know he's been like kind of talking at spring training about, you know, getting the better maximizing the lineup while also balancing defense. I mean, Ollie, dude, I've seen it for 3 years. You lean towards defense. That's why I fear Ciani and Paez will be guys that are starting. So if Walker's bad defensively, yeah, I think he'll be pulled from the lineup.
From the 314, more likely to happen, Jordan Walker or Brendan Donovan hit 25 home runs this year?
I'll say Jordan Walker.
Yeah, I like Donnie. I don't know if he's got that kind of power.
I feel like we've done this with Donnie before. We were like, oh, man, look at the power. And then it just kind of trickled away towards the end of the season.
Yeah, that happened last year. A couple of years ago, prior to that injury, he showed a little bit more pop as well. I think Donnie has some pop, but I think it's like 15 to 20 home run pop. I think that's probably where he settles in. Walker has the power to hit 30.
Yeah.
I don't know that he'll ever reach it, but yeah, I'd say it's more likely that we see Jordan Walker reach this kind of a threshold.
Yeah, I agree. I think Donnie maxes out at like 15. I don't know. Maybe he creeps over that, but I don't think he's got 25 in his range of outcomes.
Did you know Derek Jeter only hit 15 home runs and stole 25 bases 3 times in his career?
This will be an interesting comp for you.
Jimmy Rollins did it 6 times, and Derek Jeter did it 3 times.
How many World Series did Jimmy Rollins have?
At least 1.
How many does Derek Jeter have?
Doesn't matter.
At least 3.
Played on good baseball teams.
Yeah, because he was the good player.
Okay. Well, they had other good guys. I don't know if you remember. They called them like this evil empire.
No, I don't.
Fired a bunch of players.
That's fine, but he was a part of that evil empire. Jimmy Rollins also played for a really good team with a lot of really good players on it.
I remember the evil empire when it was retiring.
How many MVPs does Derek Jeter have, Alex?
I'll say 1.
I don't think Rollins should have won his.
How many MVPs does Derek Jeter have in his career, T-Bone?
0.
Sure is correct.
How many
How many
playoff MVPs does he have?
Jimmy Rollins have in his career, Alex?
1.
1.
Yeah, just the one. But he did win it. Should he have won it? It's debatable.
Who
He
finished
won.
second that year?
How many MVPs
was
in the World Series does Jimmy Rollins have? BK?
Matt Holliday finished second that year, and it was a very close vote, actually.
BK, how many World Series MVPs does
David
Jimmy
Wright
Rollins
should won
have?
that year. How many what?
MVPs in the World Series does Jimmy Rollins have?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go
How
that
many does
route,
Derek Jeter
we can go that route.
How many does Jeter have?
1.
Okay.
He won
I
it.
didn't know the answer.
Five-time
It was a
World Series
fake award.
champion,
It didn't
five-time
matter.
Gold Glover, worst defensive run saved in the history of Major
Hey,
League
but
But
Baseball.
you just
BK.
said he was on a team of superstars, and he got the MVP of the World
Once.
Series.
How many World Series MVPs does Jimmy Rollins have?
Don't worry about it.
You know how many World Series MVPs David Eckstein has? 1.
Yeah, exactly.
How many World Series,
So David Eckstein, ipso
MVP
facto,
does-
better than Jimmy Rollins.
Put him in the
I'd agree
Cardinals
with
Hall
that
of
one,
Fame.
though. I would agree with that one. Isn't he already in the Cardinals Hall of Fame?
No, not David Eckstein. I think he should be because he
Would
won a
you
World
rather
Series
be a
MVP.
regular season MVP or a World Series MVP?
World
if you could
Series
only have
MVP.
one. Mine's a regular season, and I don't think it's close.
I think mine would be regular season because it's so much harder. I mean,
would
that's
go World
162 games. I get the World Series one because, I mean, you're kind of the guy that
Look at
basically
David
won
Freese
it
and
all.
David Eckstein. You're referenced no matter what.
Yeah, we
in
don't
the
talk
team's
about,
history.
We don't talk about that Albert guy.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Who are you gonna be
if
talking-
you win an MVP,
Hey,
the odds are pretty
okay,
good you had a damn
20
good career.
Now, granted,
20
like-
years from now, who are you talking more about, Freese and Eckstein or Paul Goldschmidt?
Oh, I was just about to bring this up because Goldie's could be the one
Yeah.
that gets forgettable.
Yeah, you're going to remember Eckstein and Freese over Paul
I
Goldschmidt.
think that's fair.
I think that's correct.
yeah.
Man, 2-0 on ball these days. Guys,
Yeah,
let's
high
go
five.
baseball
Atta
season.
boy.
But would I have rather been Eckstein or Paul Goldschmidt?
I don't know. David still talks about that car he got every time
That's
we have
true.
him on
You
the show.
did get that nice car.
Although he gave it to his brother,
Although
right?
I also would take the Paul Goldschmidt money over the David Eckstein money.
I think Chris Bryant's
I think
probably
he'd
the guy
agree.
because Chris Bryant won the MVP in 2016. Like, would you rather be Chris Bryant
He can't move
or
now.
David Eckstein?
I'd rather be David
They got
Eckstein.
to put him in bubble wrap. That
They put him in
contract's
the
like the
outfield.
Rendon contract.
They
It's
put him in the
terrible.
outfield. They're like, hey, man, just try not to move around too much.
Would you rather be David Eckstein or Jimmy Rollins?
I'd rather be David Eckstein. Although Rollins is a Hall of Famer. So I'd rather be the Hall of Famer.
I'm not sure Rollins will get in, but I'd rather be Rollins, I think.
I'd rather be Rollins. I don't think it's close. Rollins
Rollins
is
is-
a really good player.
I still love you, though, David. Eckstein.
Not Freese? Why do you hate David Freese?
I like David Freese, too. He's been on the show.
He's apparently
Eckstein's
in
been on the
spring
show.
training.
Cool. We like a lot of Davids around here.
He's apparently
Yeah,
Perron's
Steve
great.
Goliath.
Yeah,
This whole thing.
Perron.
David versus Goliath.
No, I
We'll
get it,
talk
but
about it in
really-
our theology
really you're
podcast.
gonna jump that
Coming
one
up
out there?
next. Hold on. So all the Cardinals infielders are top 10 at their respective positions.
here we go.
How did this team stunk? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Tomorrow night here on 101 ESPN, we've got the Four Nations Tournament Championship between USA and Canada. We'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with puck drop at 7. And if you missed our interview earlier in the show, we had the chance to catch up with NHL insider from TSN, Darren Dreger. And you can catch that after the show on the podcast page at 101ESPN.com or via the free 101 ESPN app. The Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at Londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Our friend Buster Olney is doing his top 10 list at each position right now. Yeah, I would love to have him on. We'll try to have them on eventually.
Just try not to insult his
called him
milk
the wrong
farm.
name. I called him Jim. He's Buster, and now he won't respond to my text. The whole thing. So he has Ivan Herrera right on the outside looking in of the top 10 catchers in Major League Baseball. We mentioned this the other day. His blurb on Ivan Herrera is as follows. Quote, he'll move into the top 10 next year with the shift of Wilson Contreras to first base. Very short, succinct, to the point. He thinks he's a top 10 catcher. Just can't put him there yet because he hasn't really played.
Joke's on him. He's not going to be playing catcher. He'll be a, extra.
Touche. Wilson Contreras, who's moving from catcher to first base, Buster only has him as the 8th best first baseman in Major League Baseball before he's even really played the position. T-Bone, we were going through earlier today where Contreras' offensive numbers would rank at the position. He's like a legit top 5 hitter at first base going into the season, depending on how you think he's going to play there. So today, Buster released his top 10 second baseman in the league. Going down this list, started out at the top, your boy Ketel Marte at number 1, best second baseman in baseball.
Should have traded for him.
Number 2, Marcus Semien. Number 3, Alex Bregman, who may or may not be playing second base this year. Number 4, Jose Altuve. Number 5, Jonathan India. Number 6, Andres Jimenez. And then number 7, Brendan Donovan. Quote, he would be getting more attention if St. Louis was a playoff contender. He has 3 consecutive seasons with he has 3 seasons in the major leagues with an OBP of 365. Pretty damn good. So we're 3 positions in.
Is it also ironic that these 3 positions, there's a legit shot that none of them are playing the positions that Buster has them on the list?
That is pretty interesting.
Because Contreras could be DH, Herrera's probably not even starting over Pajes, and Donovan's in your outfield.
Very possible.
This is great.
Yeah, whatever.
Utility.
3 positions, 3 guys that, according to Buster Olney, are basically top 10 at their respective positions thus far. I think Mason Wynn will probably be on the top 10 shortstops. And my guess is Nolan Arenado will be considered a top 10 third baseman in Major League Baseball in Buster Olney's eyes as well. So that means every infield position, you'll have a top 10 player at their respective positions. I don't know about left field. Maybe Lars Nootbaar will be in the top 10 at that spot. I'm not sure, though. Certainly not in center or right. So this team stinks. But all of their players on the infield are top 10 at their respective positions. Alex, that feels like a little bit of a disconnect to me. What am I missing?
I don't know if you're missing anything. I think that's the hope. That's why this Cardinals team has made the points that, look, this is a transition for us. Now, it's not a refresh anymore. It's a transition because, look, we could have a couple of stars emerge this season. But when I look at those top 10 lists and the positions that we're talking about, to me, there's one guaranteed top 10, and that's in Wilson Contreras, in my opinion. And the others, I think, are still kind of question marks. Nolan Arenado, I don't know what this looks like. Do you rebound, and are you going to be in that position, or do you take another step back offensively? Mason Wynn looks the part, but what does the second full season look like? And I could say the same thing about Ivan Herrera. So I don't think you're missing anything, because if these guys are top 10 players in the position, this team actually might be better than what we're giving them credit for. Now, when you do the outfield, I'd put big question marks and probably no's on all 3 positions and then go to the starting pitching side of things. And I don't even know if you're going to have one crack that top 10. So there's your other big question marks that massively impact this team. But when I look at the top 10, at least of the infield that you just referenced, to me, I think I've got one guarantee, maybe 2.
Somebody on the text line said, guys, it's the pitching that stinks. That's what's holding this team back. That's entirely possible. T-Bone, when you hear Buster Olney, likely, we're projecting at shortstop and third base, but let's assume that back half of the top 10, you see Nolan Arenado and Mason Wynn's names. If you've got 5 guys in the infield and all of them are considered to be top 10 at their respective positions, shouldn't we be a little more excited about that? What is the disconnect here in your mind?
I think the disconnect is, and I think this is where maybe it is for Cardinals fans when you have this conversation, is sure, I have like no dispute with what Buster's saying on those guys that he's done so far, but it just goes to show, like, hey, they've got good players, but there's not one guy on this Cardinals roster that you can highlight and say that guy's like number one at his position. Like when you think back to when that 2022 team, if Buster did this, he probably would have had Goldie as like a top 3, if not the top first baseman in baseball, and Nolan Arenado would have been like the top third baseman in baseball. And not just because like the position was weak, it's, hey, those guys are MVP caliber players. And I think that's where the disconnect comes from is, and I think you're kind of seeing this from how it played out last year, right? Because Buster is using a lot of his information. I mean, he referenced Brendan Donovan over 3 years when he had his little write-up there, but he's going off of like what he saw last year and then ranking these positions. Well, you look at last year's team, and they had some good players, and they finished slightly above 500. The reason they didn't take that next step was, well, Goldie and Arenado weren't the superstars that they were supposed to be. And that's why when I look at this team, and, hey, should there be more excitement around this? I think it is, hey, we saw this last year. They've got nice pieces. They've got good players, but there's not much of a ceiling on that unless you have the superstars. It reminds me a lot of where the Blues are, where there isn't that superstar that you can look at and say, that's the guy that can really lift us and get us up and get us to that next level. Sure. That's how I feel about the Cardinals offense. It's been my biggest question mark going into this season is who's going to be those guys that rake in the middle of the order. They've got nice pieces. I'm not denying that. They don't have the superstars.
I do wonder, and this is a number that gives me hope about the Cardinals. I don't know how much anybody will buy into it, believe it, but it's a number that gives me hope. The Cardinals last year, just overall as an offense, 11th in batting average, 14th in on-base percentage, 19th in Major League Baseball in slugging percentage. None of those numbers are something that you write home about, but they're like middle of the pack, right? They're an average offense in general. If you just want to look at it as one number, OPS plus, or 18th in Major League Baseball. It's like a literal middle of the pack offense. And then you put runners at second or third. And in those situations, they became legitimately one of the worst offenses in the league.
The RISP that BK almost got into a fight with me over.
It should, over time, start to normalize. Like, those numbers should come back to earth in a positive way. There should be some positive regression here. It didn't. It never happened for the Cardinals last year. They finished batting .229 with runners in scoring position. And worse yet, their slugging percentage with runners in scoring position was historically low. I remember the first time they hit a home run with a runner in scoring position, it was Tommy Pham who did it. Guys, think about that. Tommy Pham was the first guy. He was not on the team until August. He was the first guy on the roster to hit a run with, or hit an extra base hit with runners in scoring position as a bench player. I think was the stat with him. They slugged .340. With runners in scoring position last year. Last year on the season, again, they were not a great offense, slugged .400 as a team. The reason I bring this up, if they are merely average this year, slugging with runners in scoring position, that's about a .400, .415 slugging percentage. Dude, that adds like probably 30 to 40 runs on what they were able to produce last year. How much differently would we view the team if they were simply average with runners in scoring position? It's a question that I'm really fascinated to learn throughout the season because I think they probably will be roughly average with runners in scoring position, not an outlier performance this time around. That's going to be one of the most important statistics to monitor early in the season because I think it changes the way that we view them as a roster if they're able to do that.
And I think it comes down to, because to me, like you read off those numbers, and they outperformed what really they should have been last year, right? They should have been more of a 75-win team with that kind of an offense that we're talking about. Sure. And to me, and again, it depends on like how significant that number is, but if it is average, my expectation is it's back to being an 82, 83-win team, and then it comes down to your bullpen, because that's what lifted them last year. And I think the bullpen takes a step back. So to me, it just, though it's almost like a levee, right? The offense kind of gets back to where you're expecting. It's a question of, does the bullpen stay where it should be / the rotation? And that's where I'm questioning. I think if you do get an average in that position, I still think they're like an 83-win team.
Potentially, but that's a hell of a lot better than most people are projecting right now. It's not great.
Sure, but how much of a step forward would be my question.
It feels more sustainable to me. Like, if they become an 83-win team and there's no Goldie and you're looking at some of the young players that have taken that step forward, and now you can add to the rotation and you've shed some of the salary that you had previously so you have less limitations going into next offseason, I think that's a pretty sizable step. I think it basically becomes what the Blues were trying to accomplish this year. if you're able to do that. Because we said coming into the season, T-Bone, I think it's entirely possible the Blues are a better team, have a worse record by the end of the season.
No.
It's kind of how I feel about the Cardinals. You might have a similar record to what you were last year, but you feel like it's a much more sustainable model, and you're trending in a much more positive direction because of the way that you did it. It's not Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn that are holding things together with toothpicks and bubblegum. It's now a situation where you've got, okay, Jordan Walker is a 6-hole hitter on a contending team. Lars Nootbaar is a leadoff hitter on a good team. Those are answers that you could potentially get here. So somebody on the text line, though, taking a different take on this. Have you ever heard the phrase, don't pee on my head and tell me that it's raining? That's BK right now trying to tell us how good the Cardinals are going to be.
Gross, man.
So
It's kind of nasty.
And then Lisa chiming in. I knew she was going to do so. Bases loaded, no outs. Come on, speak the truth. They are mentally soft.
Yes.
Lisa's not wrong there, too.
If they're bad again in those areas this year, it will beg some real questions.
If they're bad again. They were bad there for 3 straight years.
With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Jump Shorts next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Alex, what do you got for us today in the junk drawer, my friend?
So last night, I need actually a ruling here. Am I an a-hole or not?
Yes.
It's probably be a game. Shut up, man. You haven't even heard it yet.
Kind of lean towards
Shut up, man. You haven't even heard it yet. So last night when the snow was coming down, I was thinking, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to like pre-plan this because I want to make sure I can get out of my house in the morning.
Sure.
So I was like 9:30. Once we got the girls down to bed and Katie and I ate dinner, and I said, I'm going to go shovel the driveway.
Okay.
Am I an a-hole for shoveling my driveway at 9:30 at night? Because while I'm doing it, like the shovel's got a metal tip, and so, I'm scraping it along the driveway to make sure I clean it off. And I was like, man, am I an a-hole right now? Because my neighbors?
I think people understand, though.
Yeah, because the neighbor next door has
snowing?
Younger kid. What?
9:30 last night?
Was it still snowing? I think it snowed until about like 6 a.m.
So that's my question is, why did you decide to do it?
Because I wanted to try and...
Because it was going to continue to accumulate.
Yeah,
so
but I wanted to try and
ends up being basically.
But you have to remember, though, I'm in Jefferson County, so like I'm getting a little bit more than what we got up north a little bit, and so I had probably about 2.5 inches on my driveway already, and I'm thinking if it's going to snow from 9:30 until 6 a.m. like they were saying, I don't want another 4 inches or 3 inches to come down and pack in. I'd rather get 2.5 off now and then get 3 off later in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say like, what you're doing at that point isn't probably changing all that much. It's already packed down if you've driven on it. So I don't know that I would have done it.
That was the thing, though. It wasn't driven on, and it was like fresh snow. So I was thinking, it's like, I'm going to clear this off so I don't pack it in.
Did you do it again this morning? Like, did you then go out and shovel this? Yeah, I probably wouldn't have done it.
That's kind of what I was leaning. If you're going to do it, because that wouldn't be too annoying, because it's not like it's like a lawnmower, for example, which is louder.
I'd rather me do it at 9:30 at night than 6 a.m., though.
But you're doing it at 6 a.m. too, right?
Yeah.
So you got both ends of it.
Yeah, but 9:30 seems like a little bit more willing than 6 a.m.
But you're saying if it's an either or. It's not an either or. Alex did it both.
Yeah.
Alex went out there at 9:30 and then also was out there at 6.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you like gave your neighbors the question, which would you prefer? You get an either or. Would you like it at night or early in the morning? There'd probably be some on either side.
Yeah, I think if it did.
But you got it both.
Yeah, if it didn't.
I don't think it's a big deal though.
Yeah,
like scale of 1 to 10,
3.
Mowing your lawn
2.
at like 9:30 at night. That's a definite no-go because it's not urgent. This is a little different in that regard. Like if you want to get ahead of it, I personally don't, but whatever. Like I totally get it. I don't think anybody probably had any issues with it.
I was trying to be quiet while I was doing it because the people that lived next to it, the guy on the right side of me, like their kids are gone, like they're an older couple, they don't care. Family to our left, which we're cordial with, like they've got younger kids about my kids' age. But my mindset was like, okay, well, there's not going to be any school tomorrow, so they're probably up.
Sure.
So it's like, let me just go out there and get it done now so I don't have to worry about it. But as I'm like pushing it, I'm trying to do it as soft as possible, but it's still just like, and I'm like, oh, God.
Yeah, if you take a snowblower, that I think you can't do at 9:30, and probably it's frowned upon at 6, but you got to do what you got to do. Eventually, you got to get to work, right?
Just trying to be less of a jerk.
I think you're okay.
Doing it twice a little much.
I just was trying to get ahead of it, man.
If it was going to, but it's still snowing. That's what I don't understand. I know
makes
you're
it a
saying
little
to
easier.
an extent.
But this is why I did it, because last snow, I didn't. I did that mindset where I'm like, well, I might as well wait for it all to come down. You know how difficult it was to shovel 6 inches of snow at once?
Well, that one I
could do 2.5 inches just pushing it, and then the other 3 later in the morning.
It does make it a little different.
Yeah, I was just like, get ahead of it.
I think you were good. Scale of 1 to 10, how much of an a-hole were you? Like a 2.
Oh, okay,
3
good.
maybe.
Man.
If you're the guy that's mowing your lawn that late, you're a 9.
No, you're
Also,
11.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're like a 50. Who mows their lawn that late?
Dude, we had a neighbor that absolutely used to do that.
Really?
That was also the neighbor that had some other stuff going on. The FBI went in there.
Oh, so he probably didn't even realize that he was mowing the lawn at that late.
Maybe not. Definitely looks like something was going on.
Someone said
He's playing
eating dinner
Mario
at
Kart.
9:30 is the weird part.
What?
Look, man, because I said that we finished eating dinner at about like 8:30, 8:45.
That's my tip.
Oh, I eat dinner regularly at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, man, when you've got 3 toddlers, bedtime is first, dinner's second.
Yeah, you figure it out.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to do.
Yeah, we got the weird
What I've
midday
learned after
shift.
having kids, do whatever works for you. Everybody is different. And if it works for you, it works for your kids, and you guys are happy, and it makes everything else work for you, go for it, man. Do your thing. All right, one thing to pass along. This comes from John Denton's newsletter from earlier today. I know many of you guys have been asking about the new FanDuel streaming option, the FanDuel Sports Network streaming option here in St. Louis. It will be offered monthly. We knew this, Alex. $20 a month is what the price is expected to be. There will be a season pass that is expected to cost about $105 per year for the Cardinals. It also includes the 12 spring training game broadcast if you want that for an extra like $15. There is also another option, and this actually I think makes a lot of sense for fans. 12-month annual pass, Blues and Cardinals included on it, $190.
Wow.
So you get the Blues and Cardinals all year for a full calendar year, $190 in total. So it's pretty good. You break that down, $15 a month. That ain't too bad between the two teams.
Yeah.
So, pretty good deal for you. If you are interested in that, that is something that you can read a little bit more about in John Denton's latest newsletter. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll get into some NFL quick hitters. We've got Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, joining us in the 1 o'clock hour as well. But coming up next, Alex, I'm take shopping something.
Uh-oh.
How much of the Cardinals malaise that is currently coming over Cardinals fans, and I think it exists in a lot of different pockets, is due to a lack of turnover on the roster versus the specific projections that you could have for any given player? I'll try to explain this next year on 101 ESPN. All right, Alex, I need some audience involvement here. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. You know I'm higher on the Cardinals than many going into this season.
Or just high.
And I think some of that is because I look at some of these projections, and you know I'm a complete nerd, complete and total nerd. I'm wearing my cardigan today, so I fit into the mold.
Why does that make you a nerd?
It just fits into everything,
Glasses
you know?
would make you feel like a nerd.
Yeah,
The cardigan's fine.
I should have the glasses on today, the cardigan, the whole thing.
Now, if you wrap a sweater around your neck and
in my ear,
a
just
pin in
Are you Matt Patricia?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
basically.
what's going
He's
on
got
right
the
now?
pencil and a laminated piece of paper. It doesn't make
It's
any
almost
sense
like a
whatsoever.
bowling alley pencil, too. It's like a short one. It's like, what are you doing,
The
man?
paper's laminated. Dude, I know you're not using the pencil for a laminated piece of paper. That doesn't even make sense.
You're
But
making
anyway.
it look smart when you haven't even shaved your beard in a year.
So I care about these projections, and when I look at them, I'm like, man, I know I've said this for like 10 years running now, but this offense shouldn't be that bad. Like, it actually looks like a really solid offense on paper. And yet, when I say that, it is met from fans with vitriol, understandable, because over the last couple of years, it's been bad. We talked earlier today about their issues with runners in scoring position. And so we've seen these guys. We've seen Lars Nootbaar struggle with runners in scoring position. We've seen Nolan Gorman strike out 35% of the time. We've seen Jordan Walker go up and down and struggle in the field. And then at the plate, he looks great one day and then looks terrible for a month. So I get it why people are very hesitant to buy in on these players, because we've seen them fail in the past. I guess my question is this. Is it about the projections that you're expecting from them, or is it about these specific players we've almost seen too much of them now? Because if I told you, hey, instead of Lars Nootbaar as your starting left fielder, it's actually Brian Reynolds. You feel pretty good about that, right? Like Brian Reynolds, you'd be excited about being your starting left fielder going into the season. And yet, when I look at the projections, they're like almost the exact same player heading into this year, offensively, defensively, whatever. If instead of Nolan Arenado starting at third base, it was Jace Young who was starting at third base, the Tigers' young third baseman, I feel pretty good about that. But they project almost the exact same way going into the year. We've just seen Arenado fail now for a couple of seasons, but the results were pretty similar to Jace Young, and they project, again, very similarly this year. I could go down the list with a bunch of other players that are similar to, Nolan Gorman or Alec Burleson or Wilson Contreras, and you'd probably leave saying, man, if they had that lineup instead of the Cardinals lineup and I just went 1-for-1 with the players, you'd prefer the other lineup. And I think that's almost like a bias that comes into our heads as we've seen these players fail for our team day after day after day. And I think some of it leads us to being a little lower on these players locally than what I would imagine people probably are nationally on the Cardinals hitters that are in their lineup. Because I saw somebody earlier today text in saying, hey, BK has been trying to sell us that this offense has been good for 3 years now, and it hasn't been. Why are you continuing to do this? And I think that's why. It's what's leading me to think they're still potentially good, and I think it's the divide between me and a decent portion of our audience. What do you think of that?
I think you're on to something. Like, let's just go back 3 years ago and look at what the roster was for the Cardinals. The guys that played the most amount of games. Andrew Kisner, gone. Paul Goldschmidt, gone. Nolan Gorman, still here. Edmund, gone. Arenado, still here. O'Neill, gone. Bader, gone. Nootbaar, still here. Albert Pujols, gone. And they also had Dylan Carlson and Brendan Donovan.
Yep.
About half of that lineup is still here. And then if you go to the next season, I would say probably about 2/3 of that lineup is still here. Why do people always go straight to Doug Armstrong and say, oh, he's better than John Mozeliak? Because he's always aggressive. There's always some type of like, look, this isn't good enough. We got to go find a different person that can fill this spot. And I do think you're onto something in terms of, I wonder if Cardinals fans are just frustrating because they're throwing the same names out there. Because it's the old Cardinals narrative, and I mean old by like 4 or 5 years ago, of, oh, well, we got to see who these guys are. And they'd say that every single offseason, and it would be the same outfielders that you still aren't getting answers for, but yet the next offseason, it's, oh, well, we got to see who these guys are. And then you'd wait too long, and then Dylan Carlson or Tyler O'Neill would happen, and you get nothing for it. So at least for me personally, it does feel like for the Cardinals, it's like, yeah, you stick with the same underperforming players for too long in hopes that they become something, when maybe you trade them and you go get another underperforming player. Or maybe you go get something that you didn't realize, like Doug Armstrong just did, and Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, but I think some of that's fair, right? Like it is sticking with the same group, but it's the same group that hasn't produced, right? 2023, they were terrible. Now, I don't think that was on the offense. I think that was more on the pitching implosion that occurred than it was on the offense. But 2024, the offense, it's the same story. It's the same group of guys, and then you see them. Now, I do agree to an extent, like it was rock bottom for Jordan Walker. It was rock bottom for Nolan Gorman. But I also know that that's in their range of outcomes, right? Maybe they don't make adjustments. Sure. And I think that's where people have a tough time is when you see a player at their lowest, that's immediately what you look at and you say, that's what that guy is.
I guess my follow-up question to that, because I do find that to be really interesting, T-Bone, what's the alternative, though? Like, okay, yes, I've seen Gorman fail now. I know what that looks like when he fails. So do we now give up on him? Is that the response? Is a guy that 2 years ago was really good as a hitter? Now, he's not the kind of hitter that a lot of people want to see in the lineup because he strikes out a ton. But in 2023, the same guy that I can look at and say last year failed spectacularly, and I will concede that argument every time. The year before, he had an 805 OPS, was 16% above league average offensively, had 27 home runs in 120 games, and was 23 years old doing that. That is a pretty rare profile to be able to have at this level. So that's also in his range of outcomes. And in fact, it's possible he builds upon what he did 2 years ago. So both things are true. I've seen what a pretty good outcome looks like for Nolan Gorman, and I've seen what the floor outcome looks like for Nolan Gorman. Don't I need to find out which one of those is more real?
I think so. I think what Cardinals fans, and I think it kind of goes to, you were kind of hinting at this, Alex, it goes to kind of the one-hit wonders of St. Louis, right?
Totally.
And it's fallen victim to, well, wait a minute, I saw O'Neill do it once. You know, I saw Carlson do it once. Now, not be a MVP guy like O'Neill, but I saw Carlson be really good for a season. And then it just disappeared. Now,
that's true.
That can be either something that the Major League staff didn't catch. I think we all agree in this room it was probably injuries that really took an effect on Carlson. O'Neill, it's an unknown. I think it was just the lack of being on the field. And I think that's what it comes down to is it's and this happens in every sport and it happens with every organization. But I think because it's so recent with O'Neill, with Carlson, with guys that were highly touted by the organization, just like a Gorman and a Walker have been.
Totally.
I think that's where kind of this fear factor comes into of, well, I've seen the floor and it happened to be last year. That's what this guy is. And it's, well, wait a minute, don't we want to find out? Because I think that's the right answer, is finding out. But this is the last year for Walker for me to find out.
I agree.
And I get it. He's still very young. Hey, man, this is going to be the year that tells me if you're making strides or not. Same for Nolan Gorman. There will not, if they have the similar years, maybe a little slightly better, but they're both below league average, and we're having this conversation a year from now, I will no longer be defending those guys nor the organization.
No, neither will I. And to be clear here, like what I'm really defending is, hey, I think we're underestimating a little bit that Lars Nootbaar might be a good player. Like, I don't think he's a star. If you've been sold that he's a star somewhere, set that aside. I don't think that's what he is. But he can be a really nice piece to a contending lineup, batting first, second, sixth. He's not going to hit the kind of average that you want. Like, that's just not going to happen. But he's going to get on base at a really good clip. He's going to hit for a little bit more pop probably than what you're expecting out of him. He runs the bases really well. He's an excellent defender in the corner. It's a nice piece to have, especially while he's still cheap, cost-controlled, relatively young. Nice player. Brendan Donovan, good player. Mason Wynn, really good player. I think there's still upside that remains in Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker and Ivan Herrera. I think Wilson Contreras is just a really good baseball player, at least a really good hitter at a minimum. And I think Alec Burleson might be a really good hitter. I just mentioned most of this lineup that we're expecting to see going into 2025. And that's why I'm a little higher, I think, on it than most people. The Arenado thing throws everything into flux, and it just creates a weird situation, honestly. But I think they have guys that have upside, untapped potential. And with Walker and Gorman, I feel like a lot of people on our text line are focusing on the downside of what they did a year ago and just completely ignoring the upside of what they were 2 years ago. And you have to be able to look at both. I acknowledge that the downside of last year is real, and they might stink. And the book might be out on both of them. There's never going to be the big leaguers that the Cardinals expected them to be. That happens sometimes, man. Sometimes you just miss. But I also have to acknowledge that 2 years ago, both of them were 15% above league average at 22, 23 years old. That is also pretty damn impressive. And so I have to consider that as part of their range of outcomes. And if they have that in their capabilities 2 years ago, as they get older, more experienced, you'd expect at some point they could take another step. They might even be able to be a little better than that offensively.
Everything you described, at least going through those players to where it's like he's a pretty good player or a great player. to me, it sounds like a team that you actually can get excited about and feel like it can compete. But they're missing one thing. They're missing the star.
Totally. And I think that's why this year is so important, is because if you get those answers that we're talking about, now I know, okay, I've got all of the good players in place here. Now it's on the Cardinals in that scenario to go get that star.
And that's where I think the frustration, the other slice of the pie comes in.
And they've earned that. They've earned that just like T-Bone. They've earned the opportunity for you to be mad at them because they've been selling you on these other guys that had the one-year wonders in them. Like they have earned that criticism from you as a fan. But for me, like I'm only going to try to judge them this year on what is in front of us, because we're transitioning into this new era of Cardinals leadership, for better or for worse. We'll see where it ends up going. It might be that I hate everything about the way that they're going to try to construct a baseball team. That's in play. But the current roster, you're right, Alex, has a lot of good players. They're missing the star.
Yeah.
And if they can go out there and prove that these are a bunch of good baseball players, next year, if they add a star to it, boom, we're talking about a transition that could take place in a year instead of it taking 3 to 5.
And take it to the conversation we had yesterday about if Quinn Matthews emerges as that legit stud, and you've got that side of the thing answered. And that's where it's going to be fascinating, because the Cardinals, they have a lot of fans that are pissed off at them for how this last few years have gone. Dude, you could build all of that good stock back if you find the answers to these players that you are telling people that, hey, we think there's something here, and then go out and aggressively pursue that star. But if you don't, if you just sit on your hands again like they did in 21 when you had the MVP performances, 22 performances, and then you didn't do anything else, that's where I think a lot of the malice comes into play.
With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Coming up in 15 minutes, we'll be joined by the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. But next, some big news coming out of the NFL, and it could have a significant impact in this year's free agency, especially for teams that are already contending. We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN. People are mad at me. You'll never believe it, but people are pretty upset on the text line.
What'd you do, buddy?
I found out during the break.
Somebody on the text line said, BK, you're stuck in the early 2000s with sports social specialization and year-round training that happens now with kids. Players are who they are by 23 years old. Catch up, bro. Man,
Yeah, bro.
I could not disagree with that anymore. There are so many players that at 23 years old are one thing, and that by the time they turn 26, 27, 28 years old could become something completely different. In fact,
Name one.
Cairo.
A.
J.J. Weatherholt is
His
23 years
better.
old, and he's not in the big leagues yet. There's probably
Trade
a
him.
little bit of development that's going to be taking place there. Aaron Judge at 23 years old, I don't think was even in the big leagues. At that point in time, he was hitting ground balls everywhere. Like, guys change, guys develop. Give it some time for these players, man.
Let's look no further than your own St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup championship. Jordan Binnington, when he was 23 years old, was stuck in the American Hockey League. Actually, he was playing in the East Coast Hockey League.
When he was fifth on their depth chart?
When he was 26 years old, he was the best goalie in the league for half the season and won a Stanley Cup.
Man,
bro.
If we're at 24 years old, Aaron Judge had 100 plate appearances at the big league level. He hit 180 with a 61 OPS plus. Like, let's give it a little bit of time. All right, let's get off of that for a little bit.
Let's
we'll talk
keep
to Chris
going.
Kerber, the voice of the Blues, coming up in less than 10 minutes. But right now, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters. Alex, big news today in the NFL. They have announced what they are expecting the NFL salary cap to be this upcoming season. Now, they have put it at like 180 or 282 million bucks, whatever. They had it at one number. And now they have announced another. It is $5 to $10 million higher than what they were previously anticipating, which is a huge deal for certain teams. Unfortunately for the New Orleans Saints, they're still $50 million over the cap. So while this helps them, they're still in truly cap hell.
They got an email that the cap was going up. They're like, we're going to come out of it. Oh, no.
Alex, when you see something like this, cap's going up $5 to $10 million, even compared to expected rates. So it's a $25 million jump from where it was a year ago. Where's your head go?
I look at the teams that have a lot of money already tied up in players, but have a great roster. And the first one that comes to mind for me, and I don't know specifically what this does, but a team like the Buffalo Bills. That opens up a little bit more cap space for you to go out and spend money on the area that you're weak. You mentioned how big this was for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think of the teams that are still trying to push to get to that Super Bowl, and now you just open up more cap space that's tied up into heavily their quarterbacks. Well, now you got a little bit more wiggle room to go out there and bring in some assets.
Hey, Bengals. You got the cap space to maneuver now.
Joe Burrow knew something, didn't he?
I do wonder if this makes it more likely that certain players are going to be franchise tagged. Like, I would imagine a decent number of these teams had a pretty good idea of where the cap was going to be prior to the announcement publicly. The owners probably knew. GMs were then made aware. I am guessing that's probably why you're hearing rumblings now about, hey, T. Higgins is going to get the tag. We've got the cap space to maneuver even with him on the tag, so we'll be fine. We can work around that. But T. Higgins is not going to be hitting the market. That's just not happening. I would guess that had a little bit to do with it. So that was the first thing for me that came to mind.
Yeah, I think you're right, because we talked about it at the time. Like, how do you keep him on the roster? Do you tag him and then trade him? You're probably spot on. They probably had an idea that it was going up. I'm fascinated to know, like, what Jamar Chase is now looking at for what he wants, because I just saw a report that he wants like $40 million a year, which, whew, whoa, welcome to the new market, Jamar Chase. It's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do. It's going to be fascinating. Lions are a team that I also wonder, like, okay, now you got a little bit more. I read today they were running through on ESPN, you know, each team, some of their toughest cap decisions, and this was before this announcement today.
Sure.
And it was, hey, Lions could go do the Myles Garrett thing, but the Lions typically are more conservative and want to do kind of their own thing in-house. I wonder if now it can change some of the calculus for some of these teams, even though it's maybe just a little bit more wiggle room. Hey, $5 million to $10 million more is a huge deal for them.
Yeah, I would be curious also, who is the next quarterback that's going to be up? Next young quarterback that's going to be up for...
Stroud?
Potentially, but he was just last year. So you're talking a couple of years ago via the draft. That's another thing that will be affected by this is...
Purdy's the guy, I think.
He's going to get paid. And I mean...
And that's going to be a bad contract.
Yeah.
Oof.
Dude, you know who should be doing, like, Scrooge McDuck memes right now?
What?
Sam Darnold is going to make
You don't know Scrooge
a
McDuck?
boatload of money, man.
Oh, yeah. He's diving into that
Dak
closet
Prescott
full
got
of change.
$60 a year. Below that, it's 55 for Burrow, Lawrence, and Love. Tua's at 53 with Goff.
I think Patrick Mahomes should demand more money.
Patrick Mahomes is 12th in the NFL in average annual value.
I think he should
can
demand more money
only once. I'm the Chiefs. I'm not getting that guy a contract extension.
Yeah,
He's
terrible.
getting $450 million basically guaranteed. He's fine. Where do you think Purdy ends up fitting up? He's 50 plus, right?
Probably.
Got to at least get
For the
Kyler
49ers,
contract, right?
Yeah, if you're 49ers, you got to pay him that.
Where was Kyler at?
Kyler was at 46.
And that's what, right?
Goff is at 53. If I'm him, I'm saying I'm getting the Goff contract at a
That's
minimum.
what I would shoot for. I'd say I think more than Murray.
55. Jordan
Yeah.
Love.
Would you rather pay Brock Purdy or Sam Darnold?
Purdy. I can at least win with Purdy.
Do I have to?
my answer is neither.
Say,
I'd prefer to
none
pay
of them,
neither.
really.
But once you don't have that guy inside of the locker room, dude,
Yeah.
what do you have?
Yeah, I don't know what you do.
You're gonna get stuck with Trevor Lawrence.
Purdy. Yeah, he's probably. I think he's more than Jared Goff. I mean, he's been to.
He's got to be more than Jared Goff.
He's been to what? Same amount of Super Bowls, right? 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and
or no,
Purdy did
Goff's,
it.
Just
Goff's
the
only
one
been
for
to
Purdy.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah, just the one for Purdy as well.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I was thinking he'd been
Yeah,
to
didn't
2.
he do 2?
No, the first one was with Garoppolo. From 49ers. They went
Jimmy
with two different
G.
quarterbacks.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah.
He's
Very
going to get paid,
forgettable.
though. He's going to get paid. 50
Congrats,
plus
Purdy.
is what
You're
I
the
would
biggest
guess.
winner is what we just determined.
Him and Darnold are both going to get absolutely paid going into this offseason.
The biggest losers, still the New Orleans Saints.
Who's going to be the best free agent to hit the market this offseason? Because if T. Higgins isn't, the Trey Smith, the guard for the Chiefs, he's going to get like
Probably.
25 a year. Good for him, man.
Wow.
Damn.
He didn't know that he was going to be able to play the NFL football. He had this heart condition that limited his ability to practice in college. Chiefs cleared him, got it all figured out, and then he was selected in the 6th round, immediately became a starter for the Chiefs. Now he's potentially going to get 25 a year. Good on him, man. Hell of a story. All right, 15 minutes. We'll get into the BK and Ferrario Rewind. Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, joins us next year on 101 ESPN.
Hey, Chris Kerber with you here, and if you are like me and you are outside shoveling snow this morning, it's a reminder that winter is still here. So if during these still winter months and during these cold spells, if you start to hear that furnace clanking, if it's not blowing the heat the way you need it to, get a hold of my friends at Classic Air Care. They're going to take care of you like they take care of their own families. That is part of their culture. They've got a 24/7 hotline if you have an issue with it late at night or over the weekend, and they will make sure that they come out and get you up and running. Don't ignore it. Small little noises, small little things can turn into big repairs, so take care of the small things when you can. It's Classic Air Care. They're for you. Winter's still here. Make sure you use them. Check out their 4.8 Google rating as well, as they do an amazing job, and people like to talk about it, which is why they put the ratings up there. Trust me on this. They take care of my house. They will take care of yours with the same exact care. Go online at classicaircare.com, set up an appointment today, but remember them when you need them. They've been making people comfortable since 1926.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Tomorrow night here on 101 ESPN, we'll have the Four Nations Championship game for you as Team USA takes on Team Canada, and we'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with puck drop at 7. And if you missed it earlier in the show, we had the chance to catch up with NHL insider for TSN, Darren Dreger. You can check that out on the podcast page now, 101ESPN.com, or via the free 101 ESPN app. And coming up next year on BK and Ferrario, we chat with the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. This Sports Update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Alongside Alex and T-Bone on BK, Chris Kerber, the voice of the Blues, joins us now via the Callier and Thompson hotline. Always appreciate his time here on the show. Kerbs, how you doing today, man?
BK, I'm doing okay. How are you today?
Doing very well, my friend. We got the Four Nations face-off going on. Tomorrow night should be an awesome game between the U.S. and Canada. Kerbs, this is getting a lot of praise from all different directions. People talking about how the NHL basically hit a home run here with what they're doing Four Nations as opposed to doing your traditional all-star game. What's been your impression of watching this as a hockey fan?
Well, I think it's just been awesome. And the fact that when they did that, they just chose four countries which were two immediate rivals with Sweden and Finland, U.S. and Canada, and they made the most of it. And you look, in the true best-on-best tournaments, yeah, eventually Russia's got to be involved here again. But the reality of it is for what they've done for a tournament that is just put together, these players are playing with their heart, and you can see what it means to play for their country. And more importantly, BK, here's one of my favorite things. The way these players are talking about, like Dylan Larkin, right, who's been out of the playoffs for 8 years, and just talking about, I forgot what it's like to play this kind of intense hockey and be around this. And you're seeing just how good some of these players really are when it's best on best, greats on great, shift in, shift out. And I don't think there's any better exhibition of the sport than what we're seeing right now.
Kerbs, going back to that round one of the heavyweight bout between Canada and USA, and my initial reaction watching that game was watching how USA was just playing so physical, checking everything, and they were using that forecheck game. And I thought, I wonder if NHL GMs are watching Team USA play and saying, see, this style still works in the NHL. This is how you still win with a heavy forecheck and physicality.
You know what, Alex, I don't think that they even have to watch this to know that. I think if you just go back and look at, the most recent Stanley Cup champions, right? And hell, it doesn't even have to be a recent one. Go look at what the Anaheim Ducks did when they won their Stanley Cup. and go look at that season and the stats of the penalty minutes and the toughness and the truculence that Brian Burke team had. It still wins because in a series, in a time, it grinds you out. And even this is basically a series, 4 games of 7 games, right? These guys are sitting there throwing a checking. And look, when you look at, when you look at Jim Montgomery's comments, from stuff during the break, and he said, look, we went back and, looked at kind of what the top 5 teams all have in common, and it's their work habits, it's their physicality, it's the forecheck, it's things like that. That is exactly what it takes to win on a regular basis. You can get wins other ways in the regular season, but you cannot go on a deep run without that level of play in some way, shape, or form. Now, that's got to be mixed with tremendous skill, and that's what we're all being treated to this week.
Chris Kerber is the voice of the Blues. He joins us each and every week here on BK and Ferrario on Wednesdays, typically at 1:30. So be sure to tune in each and every week to hear your voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. Kerbs, we got like 6-7 games left prior to the NHL's trade deadline for the St. Louis Blues. They get back in action starting this weekend on Saturday against Winnipeg. What is it that you're going to be looking for as you're watching this team over the next week or so?
I just think that I'm going to be looking at Jim Montgomery, who I think is an amazing leader, a terrific coach, and he's going to just continue to find ways to connect with this group and get this core group to play a certain way. I don't think right now you're coming out of this break, thinking that you're a playoff team at the moment. You're going to look at these next 6 or 7 games, and you're going to say we have a playoff series. We have a 7-game series, right? And we've got to win a good chunk of them to give ourselves a chance, and let's see what happens. I just do think that in the big picture, based on history, based on what we know from Doug Armstrong, based on everything we're seeing this year, that as teams come out of this break, as they start to put deals together on how to potentially look at their team, I think that Doug Armstrong is eventually going to be looking at this and saying, if there is a deal that helps me in the immediate, being next year and the year after that tremendously, he's going to look at those deals more than he looks at the ending of this season. So does the team still have a chance? Oh, absolutely they do. But these 6 or 7 games are going to really help dictate what that chance is.
It kind of leads to my next question, Kurtz, because I know a lot of Blues fans are excited about the potential of Dvorsky and a couple of these other younger players beyond that trade deadline. And I know it's kind of predicting the future, but do you expect Doug Armstrong to try and be a little bit more aggressive with getting some NHL games for these younger players?
Well, again, having not asked that question, but looking at, say, what he did last year. Once the team was in a point last year, where it looked like, okay, the playoffs are done. And remember, we went to the final week of the season with the playoffs, or, final, 5 games of the season, with the playoffs still there. But he realistically looked at it and said, hey, I see an opportunity to get Zach Dean some games. I see an opportunity to get Bolduc some games. I don't believe there would be any other reason why you wouldn't do that this year with some of those guys. Now, depending on where things are with Springfield and the playoff potential and experiences that they could get down there, that's going to all play a role in it. But the other thing is, when you do give a young guy a bit of a flavor up here, if it doesn't mess with their contract situation, their term, and anything like that, if you have that freedom, it gives them a sense of what to expect. So when they come into camp next year, they've done a couple of road trips or 2 with the team. They've been in some team meetings. They have these expectations going into the off season, and it's not brand new to them next year. I think that's valuable experience as well. So, yeah, putting all that together, it would surprise me if you do see at some point in time a Stenberg or a Dvorsky get a cup of coffee up here to see what it's like.
Chris Kerber is the voice of the Blues. You'll hear him back on the call on Saturday for the St. Louis Blues as they take on the Winnipeg Jets. Alex will have pregame starting at 5. Puck drop for that one at 6 right here in your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. Kerbs, appreciate the time as always, my man. We'll talk with you again next week.
All right, guys, have an awesome week, and we'll see you all at the rink this weekend.
See you, Kerbs. Sam to you. That's Chris Kerber. Appreciate his time, as always, joining us here on BK and Ferrario. Hey, coming up in the next segment, we'll get to the Rewind. We will also give you a chance to score a pair of single-session passes for the 2025 State Farm MVC Missouri Valley Conference Men's Basketball Tournament, so stay tuned for that. We'll put a bow on this thing here on BK and Ferrario. Alex, tonight is a huge game for the Missouri Tigers. They're taking on Alabama at home. If they win this one, we're talking about a potential 3 seed for them in the NCAA tournament. But Alabama, to me, is a legit NCAA title contender. Over on Circa Sports in the state of Illinois, you can bet on them today. Alabama, that is, to win the national title at 11-1. If you made that exact same bet, change nothing about it. The only thing that changes is your winnings when you do it over on FanDuel. 9.5-1 on FanDuel, 11-1 on Circa. The same thing is true if I bet on Wisconsin, for example. Wisconsin, 35-1 odds right now over on the Circa Sports app in Illinois. If you made the same bet on FanDuel, you're getting 30-1 odds. You're winning the most money possible when you bet with Circa.
This is why we love Circa, whether it's those big futures bets or it's like I always put together those 9-leg, 10-leg parlays. All of those are done over at Circa Sports Illinois because they are keeping as little money as possible. They're making sure you're bringing in as much money possible. The tight money line splits, the full transparency to where they're confident in their app. They know you'll be back. Download it today. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Hey, if you missed anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Schaefer Door Company.
That 101ESPN app is super easy to use, and it is presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. You can check us out as well on YouTube after the show, during the show, before the show. It's all available for you at youtube.com/101ESPN-STL, and we always appreciate you guys going over there, subscribing to the channel. We're approaching potentially 7,000 subscribers. Hopefully we can get there by the start of the baseball season. So if you're not subscribed yet, be sure to do so. It's the easiest way to get all of the content over there. There might be some announcements on some new content coming soon over on the YouTube channel. So we'll announce that, potentially involving some people from this very show over on youtube.com/101ESPN-STL. All right, Alex, to put a bow on this thing, we'll get to the opportunity for you to score a pair of single-session tickets for the 2025 State Farm Missouri Valley Conference Men's Basketball Tournament momentarily. We're going to end today where we began, and that's with Doug Armstrong, the Blues, where they're at right now. You're going to have the opportunity here in just a little bit to talk with Jim Montgomery, Blues head coach. People can check that out over on the YouTube stream as well, where you'll be releasing the next episode of the Last Minute Blues podcast. So looking forward to that. Army was on with TMA earlier today, Alex. What was your biggest takeaway from his conversation with the guys?
I think was not so much the comments, but just kind of the vocal presence that he had, speaking of the upcoming trade deadline and exiting out of this Four Nations tournament, and the way that he sounded. And he even said, like, look, we would love to get 4 points in these next 2 games that we play, which is versus Winnipeg and Colorado. But if we don't, we're going to have to be looking at things differently. And I personally feel the reports are out there that the teams are calling the Blues are checking the market. I think once they exit out of this Four Nations tournament break, it's going to be full-fledged rumor city for the Blues and selling off pieces. And I think the front office has acknowledged the fact that, look, this team hasn't lived up to expectations. We need to make some changes with this roster. And hearing Doug Armstrong's at least tone when speaking about the trade deadline, I think I'm most intrigued of what pieces become the forefront for this Blues front office.
I liked that he was honest. He just said flat out, hey, we dug ourselves a hole. We've got 2 games coming up over the next few days. We need 4 points in those 2 games to even just continue beyond that. He's like, I'm in a day-by-day operations right now. And we need 2 against Winnipeg. We need 2 against Colorado. Alex, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think that's going to happen.
What?
And when they don't get those 4 points against Winnipeg and Colorado this weekend, I think they're going to be ready to go into sell mode. Army has done this in the past where he doesn't wait up until the trade deadline. He will start making moves up ahead of time. So that way he's not the last man standing with an asset, and then everybody else that needed that specific position or that type of player has already filled that with somebody else. No, he's going to go make the move when he feels like he's got the right thing that is being offered at that moment in time. So whether that's Brayden Schenn, whether that's Justin Falk, whether that's Nick Leddy, whether that's Radek Faksa, whoever it might be, I think we're going to start seeing some moves sooner rather than later from the Blues because I think they're accepting of where they're at right now on the list of contenders in the Western Conference.
Yeah, remember when he pulled off those Ryan O'Reilly deals and the Tarasenko deals? It wasn't at the trade deadline. It was a couple of weeks prior to the trade deadline.
Right when they were getting ready to start potentially having some momentum.
Yeah, I think he wants to get moves done as quick as possible. And even if that's a big move, like moving a Brayden Schenn or moving one of their defensemen that have term on the contract, I think he wants to resolve that not issue, but resolve that problem that's in front of them and then figure out what the roster looks like beyond that.
So we were able to discuss things with Darren Dreger. He's one of the best insiders in the business. And again, you can check out that full conversation on the podcast page after the show today. But Alex, I thought it was a great interview, and a lot of it was focused on Brayden Schenn and his future in St. Louis and really his value across the league. One of the things that stood out to me was just how valuable people around the league think that he is. He said, quote, why wouldn't you be attracted to Brayden Schenn? Talking about him as an asset to be able to add to a contender. The interest is high. He then said that Brayden Schenn is a, quote, terrific contract with high value across the league, end quote. Were you surprised by that at all?
No, because of the style he plays. Like, teams want that type of player. Everybody acknowledges how great of a player he is, how great of a leader he is. I think there is some skill there. And I don't... $6.5 million seems like a lot for a team that is struggling to win hockey games, but for a team that says, man, he is a ideal second-line winger, third-line center for this team to get to a playoff run and potentially a championship, I think there are teams that would be drooling at the opportunity to acquire Brayden Schenn. It's going to come down to, are they willing to meet the price of what Doug Armstrong wants?
T-Bone, were you surprised to hear that?
I was a little surprised, and it's because he's a 33-year-old center with $6.5 million on term for the next 3 years after this year. Like that, I understand, like Brayden Schenn playing really well this year. But I also remember when the season started, there was a lot of conversation of like, hey, that guy's a third-line center, and this contract is aging very poorly. Now, credit to him, he stepped up his game, but it's going to be hard for me to look at him and say he's going to repeat this for the remaining part of his term because of the style that he plays, as you had mentioned. It's hard to look at that and say this contract is going to be one that ages gracefully, but I think where there is some side of me that was, okay, that's not too surprising, was the fact of the cap exploding up. And Dreger had mentioned that in our interview, and I think that's why this is more, if the cap was only going to go up like $2-3 million and it wasn't going to be skyrocketing like it is, then I think we'd be having a different conversation.
It reminds me a lot of when the Blues signed Brandon Saad. The Blues knew at the time Saad's contract is not going to age gracefully. There's going to be a year, maybe even 2 years at the back end of this thing that we're paying for that maybe we'd prefer not to. But Brandon Saad is the exact kind of player that at the time that they signed him, they needed to add to the roster. And so you're willing to eat the back end of that deal to make good on the front end of it. And the Blues thought they had a contending team. Now, it didn't work the way that they thought it would, but that 2022 team was damn good, man. And if they had been able to get out of that round against Colorado, if Binnington doesn't get hurt, maybe things go a little differently there. It just hasn't worked, unfortunately. And they ended up going their separate ways, and kind of worked out for the Blues the way that everything went down. But that's Schenn for another contender.
Yep.
With the way that the cap is going up, Schenn's contract is basically to that cap what previously Brandon Saad's contract was to the Blues. So, yeah, if he becomes a third-line center, you can make that work.
Yeah.
It's palatable for these other teams. So I was a little surprised to hear just how much value other teams place on it, but we know how this league works, man. Teams put value, even if we don't, T-Bone, on Stanley Cup champions that have been there, done that before, been through the grind of what it means to go to and win the cup. Mm-hmm. They put value on centermen that are responsible, that win their faceoffs, and that play the style that Brayden Schenn does. So I think he is going to continue to be a valuable commodity as we get closer to the deadline. I'm not sure anything gets done, but it sure sounds to me, Alex, I don't think Matthew Nyes or anything in that category is going to be attainable for the Blues because it's real, like not just rosterable players, but top 6 players on contending teams. I think you could get a legit prospect for Brayden Schenn, though, and that's something that I'd be interested in if I'm the Blues.
I know there are people that kind of turn their head towards it and say it's not going to happen. Brayden Schenn's not that type of player, but desperate teams make weird moves. And desperate teams meaning like they know they need to have success in the postseason. Otherwise, it could turn south quick. And to me, I labeled the Toronto Maple Leafs as that type of team. A team that's got question marks with their pending UFA and Mitch Marner. A team that has a lot of frustrated fans that can't get past the first round. Those teams make desperate moves.
All right, he's Alex's T-Bone on BK. 101 ESPN all week long is your shot to score a single-session ticket for the 2025 State Farm MVC tournament. That MVC tournament is hitting the court on March 6th through the 9th at Enterprise Center, and all session and single session tickets are available right now. You can check out more information on that at 101ESPN.com. But if you're texting number 101 with the correct answer to the following question, you are going to get a pair of single session passes without having to pay for them. Here's the question for today. During the juncture, Alex mentioned last night he did something that he thought might or might not have disturbed his neighbors. What was Alex doing last night that could have potentially disturbed his neighbors? If you have the correct answer to that question, your texter number 101, you're getting that pair of passes for the MVC tournament. If you missed anything from the show, including our interview with Darren Dreger, check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app. For Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. here on 101 ESPN.